Solyndra was given more time to repay the loan, the government obtained additional collateral, and Solyndra was required to raise an additional $75 million from private investors that would have primacy over the government's interest in the event of liquidation before 2013. Now, this July, Solyndra's CEO visited my office as well as other members and talked about the strong demand for the company's product and how 2011 revenues were projected to double from 2010. Now, as we all know, less than 2 months later, the company announced it would file for bankruptcy. And now, the federal government's recovery of over $500 million loaned to Solyndra is at grave risk. It's always easier to assess decisions in hindsight, but particularly with a loan this big, it is critical that we get answers to several key questions. First, did the Bush and Obama administrations conduct appropriate due diligence before September 2009 guarantee approval? Second, did the Department of Energy sufficiently monitor the financial status of Solyndra after loan disbursements began, particularly as the market forces seemed to be against them? Third, did Solyndra make accurate representations to the government about its financial prospects both before and after approval of its loan guarantee? And when Solyndra's financial situation deteriorated, did the government make the correct decisions about restructuring the loan? And in examining these issues, I want to underscore that we not only lose sight of the policy context for the loan guarantee program that supported Solyndra. This program was designed to help U.S. companies to grow and compete in a global clean energy market in which countries like China and others are providing a wide range of incentives and support for domestic industry. Even if we conclude that bad judgments were made on the Solyndra loan, we've got to continue to work hard to develop and implement appropriate policies that give American clean energy investors the support they need to make the U.S. a market leader in the future, and also that protect the U.S. taxpayer. These are critical decisions. Ranking Member Waxman and I have asked that the Solyndra CEO and CFO be called, and I believe that's going to be happening in short order, because I'm perplexed how they could be in my office in July telling me things were looking better and filing for bankruptcy 2 months later. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentlelady mentioned in her opening statement about the documents we've been reviewing. Would she consider a unanimous consent request that all those documents be made part of the record?
Yes.
So ordered. With that, we recognize the distinguished full chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2009, Solyndra was the first company to receive a DOE energy loan funded with stimulus dollars. Just 2 years after getting $535 million in taxpayer money and being touted by President Obama as a model for how the government's 10-year venture capital program in green technology should work, the company has filed for bankruptcy and been raided by the FBI. We're starting to look at the DOE loan guarantee program and Solyndra's deal in February. Some question the basis for this investigation, and after 4 months of wrangling with the administration to produce relevant documents, the committee was forced to issue a subpoena to OMB. I think Solyndra's recent bankruptcy filing and last week's FBI raid clearly showed that the committee was more than justified in its scrutiny of the deal. Pursuant to our oversight functions, we have an important responsibility to pursue answers regarding the use of taxpayers' money. Our investigation raises several questions about whether the administration did everything that it could to protect taxpayer dollars. Why did the administration think Solyndra was such a good bet? Why did the administration push ahead with restructuring the Solyndra guarantees this year when some in the government voiced serious concerns about the commercial viability of the company? Why did DOE and OMB allow the government to be subordinated to the private investors in apparent violation of the law? I look forward to the testimony of Mr. Zients from OMB and Mr. Silver, Executive Director of DOE's Loan Program Office. I want to know what the Solyndra failure means for the loan guarantee program. Was Solyndra just one bad bet by an administration rushing to claim credit for the first loan guarantee, or is it the tip of the iceberg? DOE has closed over $8 billion in loan guarantees to other green tech companies, and it has about $10 billion left to spend in the next few weeks before the September 30th deadline. If the administration was so wrong about Solyndra after 9 months of due diligence, how can it possibly exercise the proper controls when doling out another $10 billion in the next couple of weeks? In this time of record debt, I question whether the government is qualified to act as a venture capitalist, picking winners and losers in speculative ventures and shelling out billions of taxpayer dollars to keep them afloat. We began this investigation to shine a bright light on a program shrouded in secrecy and uncertainty. New details are coming to the forefront today about who decided to allocate billions in taxpayer dollars and where and why. This is important information, and the public has a right to know how their hard-earned dollars are being spent. But it's not the end of our inquiry. The answers we have turned up so far spark additional questions, and I'm committed to pursuing this investigation and conducting rigorous oversight of the loan guarantee program and its recipients. Hope the administration and our friends on both sides of the aisle will share our commitment to getting answers. Yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton.
Thank you, Chairman Upton. I think this is a litmus test of how this subcommittee is going to work together to investigate something that obviously needs to be investigated. I was very gratified to hear Ranking Member DeGette's request that the record include all the documents that have been discovered so far, because at the beginning of this investigation, my friends on the minority side did not support the subpoena to get those documents. Mr. Chairman, I support loan guarantee programs for alternative energy. Having said that, I do not support the process by which this particular loan guarantee was announced. It's curious to me that in January of 2009, the Credit Committee unanimously recommended against this loan guarantee, but 2 months later, after President Obama had been sworn in, the Credit Committee approved, as far as I can tell, the identical loan commitment with no intervening improvement in the process. A DOE staff member at the time said, this project is going to run out of cash in September of 2011. How prescient was that, Mr. Chairman? As we all know, they declared bankruptcy last week. I look forward to the testimony of these officials, and I look forward next week to the testimony of the members of the company. And Mr. Chairman and Subcommittee Chairman and Ranking Member DeGette and Ranking Member Waxman, I strongly support y'all working together to pursue this investigation on a bipartisan basis. I yield back to Chairman.
And I thank the gentleman, and I yield the balance of the time to Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member DeGette referenced the fact that going back to the Bush administration, this discussion was going on in the Department of Energy. I just do want to take a moment to point out that the Credit Committee at the Department of Energy on January 12, 2009, the last days of the Bush administration, the day after their meeting, it was a unanimous decision not to engage in further discussions with Solyndra at this time. And we all know the stimulus bill was about shovel-ready projects. It appeared that the shovel that this project was ready for was to bury it somewhere, and yet it was resurrected. Now, I believe in redemption. I believe in the afterlife, but I don't believe this was the wisest and best use. I do want to convey the message to members of the administration that when this committee calls, you respond. When we ask for documents, you produce them. When we schedule a hearing, you show up. We are a co-equal branch of government. We have a responsibility to protect the people's money as well, and it does not appear that those interests were followed, and unfortunately, now the taxpayer is going to suffer. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The distinguished ranking member, the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we're holding a hearing on the loan guarantee provided by the Department of Energy in 2009 to Solyndra, a U.S. solar panel manufacturer, and this is an important hearing. Taxpayers have over $500 million at risk as a result of Solyndra's bankruptcy. We need to understand what happened, who should be held accountable, and how we can avoid future losses. We also need to ask whether Solyndra misled federal officials. In July, the company's CEO met with me in my office. He assured me that the company was in a strong financial condition and in no danger of failing. In fact, he said the company was going to double its revenues in 2011. I have a hard time reconciling those representations with the company's decision to file for bankruptcy 1 month later. Committee staff have now reviewed thousands of pages of internal documents from the Department of Energy and the Office of Management and Budget, and they raise a number of questions. The documents show that under both the Bush administration and the Obama administration, DOE officials strongly backed Solyndra. They believed its silicon-free solar panels offered. Mr. Chairman, may I have opportunity to speak?
Absolutely. The committee will be in order to listen to the gentleman's statement.
They believe its silicon-free solar panels offered cost savings, and its tubular shape reduced installation costs. And they thought the internal reviews they conducted and the external studies they commissioned showed Solyndra could compete successfully in the global marketplace. Well, these rosy scenarios were not realized. Today we'll ask why. Is the reason unforeseen developments in the global marketplace, as Solyndra and DOE argue, or is the reason sloppy or inadequate vetting, or worse yet, corporate malfeasance? By late 2010, both DOE and OMB knew Solyndra was facing difficulty meeting its loan obligation. This triggered a vigorous internal debate about what the government should do to protect the taxpayers. DOE projected that an immediate liquidation would return less than 20 cents on the dollar, so they favored restructuring because of the potential for recovering more of the taxpayers' investment. Some OMB officials warned against restructuring on the grounds that it might not be enough to avoid bankruptcy and default. Well, that was not an easy decision, and we need to ask whether the right choice was made. Given the bankruptcy of Solyndra and the dollars now at risk, we have an obligation to the taxpayer to investigate the transaction thoroughly. That's why I welcome this hearing and why Ranking Member DeGette and I have urged Chairman Stearns to hold another hearing where we can question Solyndra's CEO. I disagree vehemently, however, with the policy conclusions my Republican colleagues have already drawn. They say the collapse of Solyndra shows the folly of federal investments in solar and other clean energy technologies, and they argue the government should not pick winners and losers in the energy marketplace. This sounds superficially appealing, but there is a fundamental flaw in their logic. The majority of Republicans on this committee deny that climate change is real. If you are a science denier, there's no reason for government to invest in clean energy. It's ironic that at this very moment in Washington, CEOs of a number of corporations, including Bill Gates from Microsoft, Mr. Immelt from GE, Norm Augustine, former Lockheed Martin chairman, Chad Holliday, Bank of America, Tim Soso, CEO of Cummings, are all here representing American Energy Innovation Council, and they are calling for major new investments in alternative energy and renewable energy so that we don't fall behind the Chinese and others who are competing in this area and outcompeting us. If you live in reality, you know the world cannot continue its dependence on fossil fuels, that we are in danger of losing this industry to our competitors, especially China. In the last month alone, 3 U.S. solar manufacturers have declared bankruptcy because they couldn't compete with Chinese companies. This weekend, the business columnist Steve Pearlstein wrote in the Washington Post, listening to the Republicans talk about the economy and economic policy is like entering into an alternative universe. He's right. Republicans on this committee oppose putting a market price on carbon emissions. They oppose EPA regulation of carbon pollution. And now they oppose government investment that promote clean energy alternatives. That's an economic death sentence for fledgling clean energy companies that have to compete against both an entrenched fossil fuel industry and heavily subsidized foreign firms. And it's a grievous blow to our future prosperity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman, and with that, the opening statements are concluded, and I ask unanimous consent that the written opening statements of the members be introduced into the record. Anyone who wishes to do it. Without objection, the document will be so entered. To our witnesses, you're aware that the committee is holding an investigative hearing. and when doing so has had the practice of taking testimony under oath. Do you have any objection to taking testimony under oath? The Chair then advises you that under the rules of the House and the rules of the committee, you are entitled to be advised by counsel. Do you desire to be advised by counsel during your testimony today? No. In that case, if you would please rise and raise your right hand, I will swear you in. Do you swear the testimony that you are about to give is the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? You are now under oath and subject to the penalties set forth in Title 18, Section 1001 of the United States Code. We are welcoming you to give a 5-minute summary of your written statement. So with that, Mr. Silver, we welcome you with your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Stearns, Ranking Member DeGette, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Jonathan Silver, and I'm the Executive Director of the Loan Programs Office. I joined the Department of Energy and took this position in November of 2009. In 2005, recognizing that there was a systemic shortage of private debt financing for innovative clean energy projects, from renewables to clean coal to nuclear power, President Bush signed bipartisan legislation that established the Title 17 loan program. The program was specifically designed to support next-generation energy projects, which involve technology and market risks that private sector lenders often cannot or will not underwrite. Other governments have recognized the value of such programs as well. Germany and Canada already operate government-backed clean energy lending programs. The UK, Australia, and India have announced the intent to do the same. But none have been as aggressive as the Chinese government, which last year alone provided more than $30 billion in credit to its country's largest solar manufacturers. That's roughly 20 times larger than America's investment in the same period. Why is China making this investment? Because the race for solar manufacturing jobs is a race worth winning. Over the next few decades, this will become a global market worth trillions of dollars. In 1995, the United States manufactured more than 40% of the solar cells and modules sold worldwide. Today, it's 6%. Meanwhile, China's share has grown from 6% in 2005 to 54% today. China is now home to 5 of the 10 largest solar panel manufacturers in the world. 7 of the 10 largest are in Asia. Only 2 are in the United States. It is in this context that we should discuss the Solyndra transaction. Solyndra submitted its initial application in 2006. By late 2008, the loan program staff considered Solyndra the most advanced of the projects it had reviewed and the likely recipient of the program's first loan guarantee. In fact, by the time the Obama administration took office, the career staff had already established a timeline for issuing the company a conditional loan commitment in March of 2009. In March, on the exact schedule that had been developed during the Bush administration, the program issued Solyndra a conditional commitment. In September, after several more months of additional due diligence and documentation, DOE finalized the loan guarantee. Although I was not at the department at that time, it is my understanding that the transaction went through nearly 3 years of rigorous internal and external due diligence, including reviews by a leading independent engineering firm, the department's own solar experts, and a blue-chip law firm, all before any taxpayer funds were put at risk. The federal government was not alone in its assessment of Solyndra's potential. Some of America's most sophisticated professional investors collectively invested nearly $1 billion in the company after conducting extensive due diligence on their own, and again, before any taxpayer dollars were deployed. In 2009, Solyndra appeared to be well-positioned to compete and succeed in the global marketplace. Solyndra manufactured cylindrical thin-film solar cells, which avoided both the high cost of polysilicon, a critical component in making conventional solar panels, and certain costs associated with installing flat panels. But polysilicon prices subsequently dropped significantly, taking Solyndra and many industry analysts by surprise, and providing a significant benefit to several of the company's Chinese competitors. These developments made Solyndra's business model more challenging. The company took steps to respond, cutting costs even as revenues increased 40% between 2009 and 2010 from $100 million to $140 million. Despite increasing revenue, the company ran short of cash and faced imminent bankruptcy without an emergency influx of new capital from its investors. The Department of Energy thus faced a difficult choice, whether A, to refuse the proposed terms of that financing, ensuring that the company would close and the government would recover only a small amount of its loan, or B, to allow the company to take the financing, giving it and its almost 1,000 workers a fighting chance at success, and the government the possibility of a higher recovery on that loan. After extensive analysis, both internally and from independent market and financial advisors, and using the same tools and approaches that private lenders use in such circumstances, the Department concluded that restructuring the loan gave the U.S. taxpayer the best chance of being repaid. Unfortunately, the changes in the solar market have only accelerated. Chinese companies have flooded the market with inexpensive panels, and Europe, historically the largest purchaser of solar panels, is in the midst of an economic crisis that has significantly reduced demand. The result has been a further and unprecedented 42% drop in solar cell prices in the first 8 months of 2011 alone. These changes were particularly damaging to Solyndra, and as you know, the company declared bankruptcy earlier this month. While we are all disappointed in the outcome, Solyndra's situation should not overshadow the professional work that the Department's loan programs have done to date, or the need to continue to find ways to support clean energy in this country. Developing a robust clean energy manufacturing sector in the United States is critical to our long-term national interests, and one of the most important tools, as our global competitors have already learned, is low-cost financing, effectively targeted and deployed. This isn't picking winners and losers. It's helping ensure that we have winners here at all. We invented this technology, and we should produce it here. The question is whether we are willing to take on this challenge or whether we will simply cede leadership in this vital sector to other nations and watch as tens of thousands of jobs are created overseas. The administration believes this is a battle we must fight and win. Mr. Chairman, I thank the members of the committee, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Silver. Mr. Zients.
As you know, OMB engages in general oversight of the programs being executed by federal agencies. Therefore, OMB has been an active participant in interagency discussions about major milestones in DOE's implementation of Title 17, helping to ensure they're consistent with the statutory framework and administration policy. These interagency discussions are an important forum for asking tough questions and pressure testing assumptions, respectful of DOE's statutory authority to make final programmatic decisions on Title 17 loan guarantees. OMB also has a particular statutory role in the Title 17 program under the Federal Credit Reform Act of 1990, known as FCRA. Pursuant to FCRA, OMB reviews and must approve credit subsidy cost estimates for all loan and loan guarantee programs, including the credit subsidy cost estimates generated by DOE for the Title 17 program. OMB ensures that costs are accounted for appropriately. In performing its statutory role under FCRA, OMB works closely with agencies' credit subsidy cost models. Based on these models, OMB reviews and exercises final approval authority over credit subsidy costs to ensure that the cost of direct loans and loan guarantees are presented and reflect estimated risks consistently across federal agencies so that taxpayer funds are invested in a prudent and effective fashion. By contrast, the final decision on whether to issue the loan or guarantee rests with the agency implementing the applicable program, DOE in the case of Title 17. In the Solyndra loan guarantee, OMB's approval of DOE's proposed credit subsidy costs was conducted in August and September of 2009. While I was not directly involved in this aspect of the transaction, what I have learned since indicates that the approval process reflected a thorough examination and analysis of DOE's calculation of this estimated cost. OMB staff addressed with DOE a series of specific questions about its analysis. Based on these discussions, OMB and DOE ultimately agreed on the credit subsidy cost, and OMB ensured it was budgeted and accounted for appropriately. The loan guarantee was then issued in September 2009. In February 2011, DOE undertook a restructuring of Solyndra's debt in light of the acute financial troubles the company was experiencing. OMB's statutory role in the restructuring transaction was the same as its role in the original transaction, to ensure that the credit subsidy cost was appropriately accounted for, consistent with OMB's responsibilities under FCRA. OMB worked closely with DOE to understand the specifics of the proposal before making a cost determination. DOE ultimately provided information and analysis to OMB to show that the loan was in an imminent default and that the restructuring proposal was expected to be less costly to taxpayers than other options, including liquidation. OMB determined that DOE's analysis was reasonable and reflected the information as it was understood at that time. Since then, a challenging global solar market has continued to affect a number of solar manufacturers, including Solyndra. The company's recent announcement that it was suspending operations and filing for bankruptcy is without a doubt a very unfortunate outcome, and one that will limit the government's recovery of funds loaned to the company. Congress designed the Title 17 loan guarantee program to fund innovative clean energy projects that might not otherwise receive the necessary capital for deployment. The program envisions that while some of these projects might not succeed, others will contribute to the country's ability to achieve its clean energy goals. OMB will continue to work diligently with DOE to help make the Title 17 program a success and to ensure that the costs associated with the inherent risks in the program are budgeted and accounted for to protect taxpayers' interests. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to answer any questions you have.
I thank the gentleman, and I'll start with opening questions, and they're directed to you, Mr. Silver. If you could possibly just answer yes or no. In your testimony, you claim that some of Solyndra's due diligence was done by the end of the Bush administration. Is that correct?
Yes,
yes, that's all I need.
The application was received.
Isn't it true, though, that at the end of the Bush administration, a DOE credit committee met on January 9th, 2009, to consider the Solyndra guarantee? Were you aware of that?
The credit committee is made up of
no, I'm not answering what. I'm just answering the question.
Which met in early 2009
right.
to review.
Okay, so you agree. That credit committee recommended that the Solyndra loan guarantee be remanded to the loan program's office, stating, quote, the number of issues unresolved make a recommendation for approval premature at this time. Were you aware of the credit committee's meeting when you submitted your testimony to the committee this morning?
I was.
Okay.
I was not, as I said, Congressman, I was not there at the time, but it is my understanding that it was not, it was remanded back for additional data.
No, I'm asking the questions. I just need a yes or no. Well, I think he's given an answer. In an email sent a few days after the January credit committee meeting, a member of that credit committee sent an email to his fellow members. In that January 13, 2009 email, he states, quote, after canvassing the committee, it was a unanimous decision not to engage in further discussions with Solyndra at this time. Do you understand that the credit committee in the Bush administration essentially decided that the due diligence was not complete at this point?
No, Mr. Chairman. In fact, the credit committee that you are referring to, as I said, made up of a group of career professionals, is also exactly the same credit committee that then approved.
Oh, I understand that. But the point is, what I just quoted to you is the truth. Isn't that correct? That quote is accurate?
I haven't seen that email, sir.
Okay.
I wasn't there at the time.
Well, you can assure it is. And the DOE should quit talking with Solyndra. That was the recommendation. Now, Mr. Silver, in your testimony, you stated that regarding Solyndra, quote, much of the extensive due diligence on the transaction was conducted between 2006 and the end of 2008. I'd like to bring this information to your attention. Isn't it true that the loan program's office didn't hire its first federal employee until August 1st, 2007?
I'm not aware of that, but
Okay.
that sounds about right.
If you don't know, we can provide this information. We provided it to the committee staff through a PowerPoint presentation. Now, by the end of 2007, isn't it true that the office had only 8 federal employees?
Again, I don't know the exact numbers.
So who was doing all this extensive due diligence that you keep talking about in 2006 and 7 at the loan program?
Well, sir, the department, if you'd like an answer to that question, the department is made up of 115,000 working professionals, including about 70,000 scientists, a number of whom are solar experts.
But the DOE Credit Committee was the responsible authority for approving the credit of Solyndra.
No,
isn't it
actually,
all okay?
Technically, sir, the credit committee actually simply reviews a transaction and recommends it for approval.
I think we've established they did not think they should go ahead. Isn't it also true that during that time period, DOE was reviewing the 140 or so applications that it received in response to its first solicitation? How did DOE have time to do extensive due diligence on Solyndra from 2006 to 2007, like you indicate? That baffles us.
If you'll give me a moment to explain, I think I can. The 2006 solicitation resulted in 143 submissions. The loan program staff and others at the department reviewed those for eligibility, which is a thinner review than the full due diligence, and recommended 16 applications to file a full application. 11 did so. Solyndra was one of those, and the department conducted due diligence on all of those 11.
But, Mr. Silver, isn't it true the first draft of the independent marketing report wasn't even submitted until March 2009? You were there, isn't that correct?
No, I was not there at that time, sir. It is my understanding, though, from reviewing the record, that there were several several market research reports that were directly relevant that were used as the basis for assessment, and there was subsequently a direct marketing report done for the project, which was produced in the time frame.
Our records show an independent engineer report that you cited in your testimony was submitted in early January 2009. Is that correct?
I think that's the case, yes, sir.
The due diligent legal memorandum submitted by the Morrison and Forster, which you have also cited in your written testimony, that also was submitted in early 2009, correct?
I believe that's the case.
Given this, how do you explain the statement in your testimony that the extensive due diligence was conducted in 2006 and 2008?
Actually, I didn't say it was conducted in 2006. I said the application was received in 2006, and due diligence began and continued from late 2007 through 2008. It would be logical for the reports that you're making reference to here to be completed after that work was done during that period.
Well, Mr. Stewart, I think my time has expired, but I think what we've established is that the credit committee during the Bush administration found the Solyndra deal to be premature and remanded it for further work. And we have all the evidence and all the clear evidence, so we're a little puzzled with your opening statement. With that, my time has expired, and I recognize the ranking member, Ms. DeGette.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start my questions by asking unanimous consent to put the credit committee recommendation that the chairman referred to into the record so we can know what we're talking about.
By unanimous consent, so ordered.
Thank you very much. Mr. Silver, I've had staff hand you a copy of this credit committee recommendation. Have you seen this document before?
No, ma'am, I have not.
Okay. This is the document that the chairman was referring to where the credit committee remanded the project to BPO. They denied the application and they remanded it for more information. That's the thing the chairman was referring to. And it was also the information that he had up on the screen. It was from this memo. Now, as I read this document, it says, while the project appears to have merit, there are several areas where the information presented did not thoroughly support a finding that the project is ready to be approved at this time. And then it lists 4 areas that it says need to be supplemented. Do you see that?
Yes, ma'am.
And then at the bottom it said the credit committee is appreciative of the hard work done by the origination staff, but believes the number of issues unresolved makes a recommendation for approval premature at this time. Do you see that?
I do.
And then it concludes, therefore, the committee, without prejudice, remands the project to the LGPO for further development of information addressing the issues outlined above, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So this document's not a complete denial of the application. It's remanding it for more information, correct?
Not only is it not a complete denial, it would be typical of a credit committee in both the public and the private sector to perform its function in exactly this way if they believed additional data.
And was that data eventually developed and submitted to the DOE? No? The data that was requested.
The data was additionally developed, and the summary of that data was represented to the credit.
And subsequently, in March of 2009, the application was approved, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And was that data submitted as part of that application, this data that was requested?
Again, I wasn't there, but it is my understanding that that was the case.
Okay, thank you. Now, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about what kind of policies and incentives that we need to have in the United States to promote competitiveness in the clean energy market. This is what you talked about in your testimony. In your written testimony, between what you said was between 1995 and 2010, the share of photovoltaic cells and panels manufactured in the U.S. dropped from over 40% to just 6%. We've seen this with some Colorado companies that are trying to develop solar, but they can't actually find cells that are manufactured in this country. Since 2005, China's market share has actually increased from 6% to 54%, and half of the world's 10 largest solar panel manufacturers are now Chinese. So the question I have is, what does that tell us about the state of play in the solar manufacturing industry?
Congresswoman, I think it tells us that the rest of the world takes this industry and this industry opportunity enormously seriously, has a multi-decade perspective on its importance, believes, as we do, that it will be a multi-trillion-dollar market that will generate tens of thousands of jobs, and is deeply committed to it.
Now, what is the Chinese government doing that you know of to provide support to its solar industry?
The Chinese government has already committed up to $30 billion of credit to its 4 or 5 largest solar panel manufacturers. It generally and frequently provides both zero-cost financing, occasionally free land, and other kinds of incentives and subsidies to that sector.
And does cheap labor play a part in China's ability to dominate the world market on this solar development?
It certainly has in the past, and cheap labor does play a material role in other parts of the world in their competitiveness. Increasingly, however, the challenge is becoming one related to government support for the industry itself, financing.
So it's not as much cheap labor as capital that the Chinese government is providing, in your view?
Access to inexpensive debt capital, yes.
Okay. So based on your experiences at DOE and the private sector and your understanding of initiatives like other governments like China, do you really think it's worth us having policies like this Title 17 loan program and other policies to support solar, or should we just walk away from it altogether as a government?
I can't imagine a scenario in which we would willingly, as a country, walk away from what will be undoubtedly one of the largest, if not the largest, industries in the world over the next several decades. Well,
do you think, though, that there's any way we can actually compete?
Yes, we have an incredibly strong, innovative workforce. But what we've got to be able to support not only innovation at the R&D level, we also have to be able to support commercial deployment. Without commercial deployment, we cannot continue to recognize the benefits that come from innovation.
So, irrespective of the details of the Solyndra case, which are still unfolding to this date, you think that these kinds of loan support programs are important to development of the U.S. solar energy and jobs. Is that right?
I think they're critical. They are only part of the fabric of what is necessary, but they are critical.
Now, Mr. Pronounce your name for me.
Zients.
Zients. Mr. Zients, I wanted to ask you, because you talked about this Title 17 funding, and there are a number of other projects that are receiving, and I believe over 40. Has it worked in other projects? Is it working in other loan situations?
Well, the program is, as you know, relatively new, so loans have recently closed for the most part, and we have every reason to be optimistic that the portfolio as a whole will perform.
And how large is the portfolio as a whole?
I defer to Jonathan on specific numbers. I think you have a good estimate in what you said.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the record, are you two gentlemen career civil service employees or are you political appointees?
Political appointee, sir.
Political appointee.
Both, okay. Chairman Stearns alluded to this, but I want to follow up a little bit. While President Bush was still in office on January the 9th of 2009, the Credit Committee, which is a part of the Department of Energy, I believe, did recommend against going forward with the Solyndra loan. Less than 2 months later, on March the 12th of 2009, the Credit Committee conditionally approved the loan. First of all, is that factually correct?
The timeline is correct, sir. The credit committee, the first credit committee that met, did not reject the loan. They remanded it back for further analysis. But your timeline with respect to the two credit committees is correct.
The individuals that are on the credit committee, are those political appointees or civil service?
Civil service.
Okay. Were the two credit committees identical in their makeup?
I believe that to be true.
So the same people in the same agency, to use your terminology, needed additional information, or what, anyway, they did not approve it in January, but in March, the same committee with the same, made up of the same people, did approve, or conditionally approve. That's correct, right?
No, sir. Technically, the credit committee does not approve a conditional commitment. The credit committee recommends a transaction for approval, which is then further reviewed by a group called the Credit Review Board, the CRB.
Okay.
And
well, they put up, instead of putting up a red light, they put up a green light, or at least a yellow light.
They indicated that the initial questions that they had raised in the first meeting had been addressed. And they
Now, what changed in the intervening period?
Additional due diligence was conducted, particularly.
Specifically, what changed?
Well, as I say, additional due diligence was conducted.
Well, specifically, what additional due diligence?
Additional market research was developed. And
is that available, and does the committee staff have it?
I believe the committee staff has it. We have turned over over 35,000 pages of materials.
But for purposes of this hearing, under oath, you're saying that what changed is additional information that wasn't available in January became available in the intervening period. Is that correct?
Additional due diligence was done by the
additional due diligence doesn't cut it. Okay, we need you know, a $500 million that was not supported in January under the Bush administration was supported, conditionally recommended in March. We know that one thing changed is that the president changed. We know that changed.
I'll be happy to get back to you, sir, with additional information.
But due diligence is a generic term.
Well, it is a generic term, but it covers very specific things, particularly research on market conditions, financial conditions, technical.
Is it possible that one of the things that changed was political influence?
I don't believe so, sir. I wasn't there, but there's no indication in the record.
Nobody commented to the White House that this project should go forward. There were no supporters of the president that stepped forward and had meetings, and there were no White House officials that encouraged people at the Department of Energy to this was all done under a bubble top and purely on merit.
Well, sir, I can't speak to that because I wasn't there, but what I will say to you is that the loan program career staff that did the work in 2008 under a Republican-appointed CFO continued to do that work under the same individual who was a carry.
Well, let me ask one final question because my time is about to expire. Is it typical of a loan guarantee that a project, one, gets $500 million, and two, that $500 million is 2/3 of the cost of the project, and three, that the federal obligation is subordinated to private sector capital, which is a direct violation of federal law?
There is no typical, sir, in answering that, because every project financing is different and depends on the size, structure, and the technology being.
So if myself and Mr. Scalise and Mr. Gardner, and maybe for good measure, Mr. Markey and Mr. Dingle put together a deal and asked for $500 million, it's acceptable for this, under this program, it to be approved?
Well, sir, if you had a legitimate project that went through...
I think we could have a legitimate project that wouldn't go bankrupt within 2 years.
If you had a project that met the criteria of the solicitation and was deemed to be eligible and went through technical, legal, financial, regulatory, and other kinds of due diligence and was deemed to be a potential process, then perhaps yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. The distinguished ranking member, Mr. Waxman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I understand it, in 2005, the Congress passed the Loan Guarantee Program. We did this on a bipartisan basis because we wanted to move forward with these enterprises that would give us renewable and alternative energy rather than continue our reliance on fossil fuels. The idea of a loan guarantee is that we want them to borrow the money, but we know there's an inherent risk in a new startup. Isn't that correct, Mr. Silver?
Yes, sir. When Congress set up the program, it set it up specifically to compensate for the lack of debt financing for innovative energy, and recognized the inherent risks in that by providing credit subsidy, which is essentially loan loss reserve.
Then no one wants to go and invest in the market in a solar energy or wind power or anything else unless they know it's really going to return their investment and give them a profit. So the government has decided we will help these groups get started because it's important for our nation to move to alternative energy.
I agree with that, and I would only add one caveat. We don't actually start these companies. The private sector does. In the case of Solyndra, almost $1 billion of private equity had gone into this company before the government made its loan, and all of the transactions that we work on have very, very significant private capital behind them.
I was taken aback by the figure that between 1995 and 2010, the share of photovoltaic cells and panels manufactured in the United States dropped from 40% to just 6%. At the same time, just since 2005, China's market has increased from 6% to 54%. So half of the world's largest 10 solar panel manufacturers are now Chinese. And we would like to be able to compete as well. I gather in your answer to Mr. Gett is one of the reasons that China is outmaneuvering us is that the government is putting a lot more money behind their solar energy industry than we're doing. Is that right?
Yes, sir. As I said, China has committed at a minimum $30 billion from the China Development Bank and another several billion.
And that's 20 times more than we're providing by way of any subsidies or loan guarantee.
At least, because there are other subsidies and incentives that the Chinese government provides as well.
Well, who would be against such a thing? Well, I'll tell you who would be. Entrenched fossil fuel industry wouldn't like this. It's competition for them. And I think that's playing a part in some of the reactions that I'm hearing. But one of the key issues of this investigation, as identified by Chairman Stearns, has been whether DOE issued the Solyndra loan guarantee as a favor to George Kaiser, a major donor to President Obama's campaign. These are serious allegations. Mr. Stearns said the administration gives, quote, some of this money out to people who are either contributors or strong supporters, end quote. And he implied that the Solyndra loan decision was based on political favoritism. Before asking you about these allegations, I'd like to get a bit of background on this loan guarantee. My understanding is Solyndra applied for this loan in 2006 when Bush was president.
That's correct, sir.
And the DOE invited the company to submit a full application of the program in October 2007.
Yes, sir.
And in December 4, 2008, DOE documents outlined the Solyndra loan as one of the 3 highest priorities of the next 45 days, and all this took place during the Bush administration.
Yes, sir.
Now, in fact, a January 5, 2009 email to a DOE official, John Scott of Solyndra, said, quote, we think that a public announcement would acknowledge the hard work of the existing administration and the appointees in DOE and the LGPO, as well as benefits Solyndra's fundraising efforts for the equity contribution, end quote. And in this email, Mr. Scott was talking about the Bush administration. But the fact that the loan didn't close until President Obama took office seems to have given rise to allegations of political favoritism. Well, this Kaiser group wasn't the only private investment. A lot of the investment came from another group that is called Madrone, and that's the Walton family. They give to Republicans. But they were looking to make an investment in a loan that was being guaranteed by the federal government. I'd like to ask you, Mr. Silver and Mr. Zients, about your interactions with Mr. Kaiser and his impact on this loan. Did you or your staff have any interaction with Mr. Kaiser relating to the Solyndra loan guarantee?
Well, sir, as I said before, I was not here at that time, but no, I've never met or spoken to the man, and as I understand from my staff, neither have they.
And the staff were civil servants?
Yes, sir.
Who have been around?
Yes.
Even to the time of the Bush administration. Mr. Zients, is that the same answer
Same
for
for
you?
me, both personally and my knowledge of the OMB staff interaction.
Did either of you instruct anyone to give the loan guarantee to Solyndra or restructure the loan because of the donations to the President by Mr. Kaiser?
No, sir.
No.
Did anyone in the administration instruct you or your staff to grant or restructure the loan guarantee because of the donations to the President by Mr. Kaiser?
No, sir.
No.
Are you aware of anything that would suggest that Mr. Kaiser's donations to the President were a factor in determining whether to grant the Solyndra loan guarantee?
No, sir. Again, I wasn't there, but I have no reason to believe that.
I was not actively involved, but have no reason to believe that.
Can you assure us that the Solyndra decisions were made on the merits and that there was no favoritism shown towards Solyndra for any reason?
It is my understanding that that's correct.
My understanding is the same.
Our chairman has made some serious allegations. I think the real question before us is whether the vetting was done appropriately and whether it was done based on full representation by Solyndra about their economic viability. And I don't think we ought to use this failure of this particular guarantee to discredit what is an important loan guarantee in order to move to be able to compete in this area with China and to move our country away from dependence on fossil fuel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Dr. Burgess, gentleman from Texas, recognized for 5 minutes.
And I thank the chairman. And I'll agree with Ranking Member Waxman. We do want the availability of solar at the retail level in this country. I look forward to the day where I can reduce my electricity bills by putting some type of solar panel on my roof or in my yard. But have we advanced that vision of the future with the activities that have occurred in regards to this case, and in particular the jurisdictions for which you two are responsible for, the Department of Energy and Department of the Office of Management of the Budget, which does have the responsibility for direct oversight. Now, Mr. Zients, in your testimony to us today, you talk about pressure testing, I believe, when you were talking about the interagency discussions, an important forum for asking the tough questions, and pressure testing assumptions. Well, let's think about that for a moment. There are a lot of emails that have now been produced to the committee staff, and in going through those, we keep coming up against the notion that there was pressure, all right, but this was a pressure cooker. This wasn't a pressure test. This was, we got to get this thing out the door because we've got a groundbreaking, and it might involve a trip by the president or a satellite appearance by the vice president. So, yeah, there was pressure, but it was pressure applied in pushing this thing out the door. In retrospect, was that the wrong kind of pressure to apply?
Are there specific emails that you're referring to?
I'd be happy to do
Did I get a copy?
Were we providing him a copy of those emails? I think we are. I don't want to reference anyone's name because that's not appropriate.
Mr. Chairman, if I could be provided a copy of those emails, that would be helpful.
Well,
We'll do it. We'll do
I'm
it.
just
Glad to
looking
do it.
top line at the dates here.
These are all available.
They appear to be on the August time frame, where I'm not, to the best of my knowledge, an author of any of these emails, or actually even on any of these emails, as I was not actively involved. So I will comment, but I don't know the intention of any specific email. At that period of time, OMB was playing its statutory role under FCRA to ensure that an appropriate credit subsidy score was given to the project. So this is not about whether the loan should go forward or not. This is about the accounting for the loan. And there was some scheduling requests from the VP's office, and the VP's office was interested in potentially being part of an announcement of the closing of the very first loan. But I want to be crystal clear as to my understanding from my interactions with the staff in preparation for this hearing that those scheduling requests had no impact whatsoever on the credit subsidy score that was given to this project. OMB staff, based on its analysis, decided to increase the credit subsidy score to make it more conservative, and DOE agreed with that. So the closing occurred after OMB staff had done a thorough analysis of the credit subsidy score and decided to increase the credit subsidy score to make it more conservative.
Well,
so the scheduling logistics.
I'm going to run out of time. Let me just reference August 27th, 2009, 4:40 p.m. And this is an email from someone in OMB. As long as we make it crystal clear to the Department of Energy that this is only in the interest of time, there's no precedent set, then I'm okay with it, but we also need to make sure that they don't jam us on later details, so there isn't time to negotiate those two, implying that there was pressure, there was pressure placed on...
Well, again, not being involved and not being on this email chain, I think what is clear is that OMB staff was, to the best of my understanding, based on my discussions with OMB staff, because I was not actively involved, comfortable with the credit subsidy score, which is the statutory responsibility of OMB. And in fact, the credit subsidy score was increased during the period of time,
and
DOE agreed with that.
It doesn't sound like they were comfortable. They say it's in the interest of time. This time we'll let it go, but tell those guys over at DOE that they're not going to jam us on this also.
In preparation for this hearing, I talked to the OMB career staff, and no one hesitated in my discussions with them as to whether they were comfortable with the final determination of the credit subsidy score for this project. And as I said, the credit subsidy score was increased, i.e. made more conservative as a result of the OMB analysis, and DOE agreed with that.
Let me just, in the remaining time, Mr. Silver, ask you, this is the filing with the SEC on the S1 report from March 2010 on the planned initial public offering, and Solyndra's auditor, PricewaterhouseCoopers, stated the company's S1 amended that the company has suffered recurring losses from operations, negative cash flow since inception, and has a net stockholder deficit that raised substantial doubt about its ability to continue as a going concern. Did this prompt any curiosity on your part, or did it change anything about the Department of Energy's behavior about this application?
Well, let me respond first, Congressman, as a former venture capitalist, and tell you that frequently companies, particularly high-growth companies like Solyndra, will make filings for companies that are, while they're growing rapidly, still are continuing to burn cash. A going concern review by an independent auditor accompanies that kind of scenario. I should also point out that in the time frame...
Sir, I'm going to run out of time, but with all due respect, venture capital is different from a government investment, a taxpayer subsidy. This is a different universe, and your response as a venture capitalist is likely not consistent with being a good steward of the taxpayers' money. And I'll yield back to the chairman.
The gentleman yields back. We recognize the chairman emeritus of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Dingell.
Most kind. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am very pleased to see that we are having proper oversight, and it's my hope that as we go forward, that if the majority has evidence of wrongdoing, they will present it to us so we can take proper action. Mr. Silver, You say in your testimony that Solyndra first applied for a guaranteed loan in 2006 when President Bush was still in office. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
I understand that you have people who work within the loan program office and who do the due diligence on determining the quality and feasibility of loan applications. Are these people political appointees?
No, sir. Career staff.
Their career.
And analysts and advisors.
Good. Now, so the staff reviewing application for guaranteed loan over the past 5 years are not political appointees, but instead are career non-political employees who serve from administration to administration. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, although I understand you haven't yet been at the loan office, is it your assessment that the guaranteed loan was awarded based on the project proposal and the strength of the application and not on any political influence? Remember, you're under oath.
To the best of my knowledge, and as you point out, I wasn't there, but to the best of my knowledge, yes.
Okay. So non-political career Department of Energy employees, while serving under the Bush administration, recommended a timetable to award Solyndra a guaranteed loan. Was this a timetable against which the loan was eventually committed? Yes.
The career staff identified the timeframes after having brought it forward in the first credit committee as March for a second credit committee and produced it at that time, yes.
All right, let's go fast forward to a year to 2010 when Solyndra approached the Department of Energy for further assistance. Was this due to low-cost competition from Chinese manufacturers? Solyndra needed help. If your office had not agreed to restructure the loan, would Solyndra have gone bankrupt in 2010?
Yes, sir.
Now, without the structured loan or restructured loan, would Solyndra have had any chance of success?
It's hard to imagine how, since they had a liquidity crisis, they were out of operating capital.
Now, would the company's 1,100 workers been laid off in 2010 then?
I would assume so, yes.
Solyndra secured an additional $75 million from investors as part of the loan restructuring. Is it a standard in loan restructuring for new investment to have priority in the case of liquidation?
It's very typical.
Now, Mr. Chairman, I have been waiting anxiously to hear what we have to show that there is wrongdoing here. And I'm still waiting to see something that makes me be concerned that we have here some wrongdoing. And I don't want us to proceed just on suspicions or doubtful questions or misinterpretations of emails or finding emails where none exist. Now, let's try and see what took place. First, during the Bush administration, Solyndra submitted a pre-application for a loan guarantee. Second, in a financial and technical review were conducted. In October 2007, the Department of Energy invited Solyndra and 15 other applications to submit full applications. Solyndra submitted their full application in 2008. Later in 2008, the Department of Energy indicated that Solyndra was in the best position to receive the first loan guarantee. Remember, this was under the Bush administration. In January 2009, during the final days of the Bush administration, the department set forth a timeline to complete due diligence on the Solyndra application that would lead to approval by the spring of 2009. Next came in the administration of President Obama. Now, during that spring of 2009, the department continued to do its due diligence and completed its work in August. The loan guarantee was issued in September 2009, 3 years after the pre-application was originally submitted. I'm looking forward to hearing from the committee leadership and from the committee staff. Is there anything in the record to suggest this proposal was rushed through or that improper consideration was given or that there was any improper or illegal pressure or political activity which might have led to us being where we are today? I would urge my colleagues to look hard for the facts and take all the facts in consideration and to see to it that as we go about our business, we are careful in finding the truth and not just having a splendid time making unjust accusations regarding the program and the administration. Thank you.
Gentleman, time has expired. Recognize the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Terry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would agree with the Chairman Emeritus that we do need to do our due diligence and find out on behalf of the taxpayers what went wrong here. And that does need to be our ultimate mission. There's a theme that I'm picking up in the questioning, and that's I think everyone must agree that there's some scandal involved in this. And I'm reaching that conclusion by the amount of time spent to ensure that people believe that this was somehow approved and all of the work done under the Bush administration. That seems to be the MO, is if there's a crisis that occurs today, blame it on the past administration. And so just to set some facts straight, because even you, Mr. Silver, mentioned in your written testimony provided to us that Solyndra submitted its initial application in 2006, and much of the, quote, extensive due diligence on the transaction was conducted between 2006 and 2008. But an unrefutable fact is that on January 9, 2011, the Bush administration DOE Credit Committee remands the Solyndra application, calling it premature and citing unresolved issues. So it seems to me that not all of the quote-unquote extensive due diligence was on the transaction was conducted between 2006 and 2008, but that the Bush administration said very specifically that the application required much more due diligence. Then you said, Mr. Silver, if I'm correct, that you said in 2011 more due diligence was done that led to the approval. Is that a correct statement?
I believe you mean 2009, Congressman?
Well, yes.
Yes. Additional due diligence, as it is my understanding that additional due diligence was done from the time the initial credit committee remanded it back to the loan program effort through to the next credit committee, which met subsequently in March. And during that time, additional work on market research and legal and technical matters and other kinds of things that would normally make up the responses to the questions that the credit committee had asked were developed and answered.
Now, then after the president was inaugurated, an email from a DOE staffer states that we're approaching the beginning of the approval process for Solyndra again. So the work continued on the application, correct?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Now, what we would like to know is, Mr. Waxman was going down this path, so I'm going to follow up on his questions. He asked it in a way that made you responsible for assuming motives of other people. I'm just going to ask you point blank. After you started in your role at DOE, or in your role, did you receive any communications from a White House employee, personnel, Carol Browner, Rahm Emanuel, anybody, regarding the Solyndra loan?
You mean in
yes or no?
After what period? When I joined?
Yeah.
No, when I joined,
you had
Solyndra
no
loan had
communications from anyone
at the White
House.
The Solyndra loan was closed in September, sir, and I arrived in November.
What about the restructuring time period?
Well, the restructuring occurred approximately a year later, was largely conducted on a staff-to-staff basis. There were interactions.
Was there interactions then? If you're denying that you received any communications directly from the White House to you,
No, what I'm trying to describe to you...
That's my question, so please answer my question. Did you receive, during your time there, any communications from anyone from the White House regarding the Solyndra loan? That's an easy question. It's either yes or no.
And it actually has an easy answer. We work regularly on this transaction and every other transaction with our interagency colleagues at OMB and at the NEC.
I said White House.
I'm not sure what distinction that is. We work with the OMB,
Oh, really?
Treasury, and
How about,
NEC.
you want me to start naming individuals? Carol Browner and her staff.
Well,
Did you receive any communications? I think the question's fairly clear in your...
It is, and what I'm saying, the answer to
Mr. Silver, you're under oath, and he's asked you a question, yes or no?
the question is, do we interact with elements, with different agencies? And the answer to that question is yes, extensively.
I did not say different agencies. I said
well, and
White
different individuals
House.
in that in those agencies. We work.
Okay, so you did receive communications directly to you from somebody in the White House.
I don't recall who would have been involved directly. What I can tell you is that the discussions around these transactions, as Mr. Zients referred to, are conducted on a career staff to career staff basis, working to develop the transaction.
So once again, have you received any communications regarding the Solyndra loan from anyone from the White House?
Well, I mean, Mr. Zients and I have talked about it, for example.
Okay. Mr. Zients, have you? It's a fairly clear, obviously, Mr. Silver is not going to answer the question.
Well, again, as to the loan itself, I wasn't involved when the loan was closed. As to the restructuring, yes, I do interact with components of the White House. I would draw a distinction between OMB and the White House to tap into their expertise on energy and on financial markets.
Okay. And who was the person that you were communicating with in the White House?
The primary expertise resided at the time in what was then the Office of Energy and Climate Control.
That was Carol Browner's office.
Carol Browner led that office, yes.
Did they suggest to you, my time is up?
Thank you, gentlemen. And the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. I'll just note, first of all, that if you want to waste American taxpayers' dollars, let's talk about the oil industry at record high profits, getting $41 billion worth of tax money from taxpayers. And secondly, if you want to talk about loan guarantees, the Southern Company has received a loan guarantee 15 times larger than Solyndra. And if we're going to re-examine whether or not that's a good investment, after Fukushima, after the earthquake near the North Anna plant, let's have that hearing, because I think that money is in jeopardy if you're really concerned. That's 15 times larger. We know we'll never have a hearing on the oil industry or the nuclear industry in this committee. This is all part of an agenda here that deals with the solar industry, the wind industry. So let's go back in time here, Mr. Silver. It's back in 2009. You're looking at this loan guarantee. What does the market look like for solar?
Well, although I wasn't at the Department of 2009, I do have a point of view on the solar industry then. Polysilicon prices were extraordinarily high, and the cost, what they call balance of systems costs of putting conventional solar paneling on roofs, which involves penetrating the roofs as well, was very, very expensive. So the Solyndra technology, which had received a lot of attention during that period, was particularly innovative because it addressed both of those key problems.
In general, you're not providing this financing to Fortune 500 companies. You're providing them to companies that are largely startups with innovative technologies to ensure that we are in this marketplace. Is that not correct?
That is, Congressman, and with the added addition that the companies themselves are required to raise substantial amounts of capital, and Solyndra had already raised many, many hundreds of millions of dollars.
Now, when these loan guarantees were being provided, at any time did your agency or any part of the federal government project a 42% drop in the price of solar panel prices in an 8-month period?
Well, not only did they not project the 42% drop this year, but between 2008 and now, that price has dropped about 80%, and most analysts were surprised by that.
So just so we can have an honest discussion here, there is a Moore's law for solar, and I hold up the chart, and that is that every time there is a doubling of solar panels worldwide in deployment, the cost of producing them goes down by 18%. And that phenomenon has become very predictable. Now, in 2011, so we can see the forest for the trees, the Chinese funded $20 billion for 4 solar companies in 2010. And we've seen in the first 8 months of this year a 42% collapse in the price of these solar panels. Was that foreseeable in 2009?
It was not, although China's commitment to this was increasingly clear, and actually I believe, Congressman, that number is closer to $30 billion.
Did anyone in the marketplace predict a 42% drop in the price of these solar panels in 2011?
I can't speak for every analyst out there, but certainly many, many professionals following the industry were surprised.
We're surprised. Now, let's go to the marketplace at large. Evergreen went bankrupt this year in the United States. SpectraWatt went bankrupt. German Solar SE shut down their Arizona solar facility. BP Solar shut down their facility in Frederick, Maryland. Emerging Conversion and Daystar Technologies lost 80% of their market value this year. This 42% drop this year is as a result of the Chinese intervention in this marketplace. This was not knowable in 2009. This was not knowable in 2010. This was a market intervention. Now, if the Republicans think that, like Johnny Carson's Karnak, that there's an envelope, with the answer in it that was available in 2009, they're kidding themselves. We're in a race. We're in a global race here. And we are doing our best to make this case to the Republicans on this committee. While they keep the loan guarantees for nuclear intact as they pass their budget, while they continue to protect those oil company tax breaks up to $41 billion, they are trying to now to pin, on a collapsing market here in the United States on something that really is related to the fact that we're not focusing upon the Chinese intervention into this marketplace. So I just hope that the administration and their policy of financing these kinds of programs, and I think for the most part it's been a big success story, and I think we have to keep that in mind as well, is something that this committee keeps in their mind as we move forward. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen, Mr. Sullivan is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you holding this. Mr. Silver, on January 9th, 2009, the Credit Committee during the Bush administration found the Solyndra deal to be premature and reprimanded and stopped all further work. An email sent by DOE Credit Committee a few days later stated that it was unanimous decision not to engage in further discussions with Solyndra at this time. And yet, on January 26, 2009, after the Obama administration came in, a DOE staffer notes in an email that DOE has decided to restart the approval process for Solyndra. What prompted this decision?
Well, Congressman, again, since I wasn't there, I can only give you my review of the record, but it appears to me that when the first credit committee remanded it back, what they specifically did was to say, we have specific questions which we need answered before we can take this application up again. The career staff in the Loan Programs Office then went to work answering those questions, and when they had been resolved, brought the transaction forward again.
This was about 2 weeks before the stimulus was signed into law. Didn't that have something to do with it?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Secretary Chu directed DOE to accelerate the process and deliver the first loan in a matter of months. Is that right?
I don't know what the Secretary said specifically, but the Recovery Act certainly had a focus on bringing projects forward quickly. In fact, as you know, Congressman, there is a sunset date of September 30th of this year to get the 1705 projects done. A lot of work has gone into this and other programs to move money as efficiently, effectively, and yet as prudently as possible.
Solyndra's application was part of Secretary Chu's acceleration process. You know that is right, don't you?
I assume that to be true, but again, I wasn't there.
So you say yes?
I assume that to be the case.
What did DOE do to accelerate this process? At this time, the DOE Loan Programs Office was very thinly staffed. Is that right?
It depends on your definition of thinly, but yes, there were not very many people there.
How many employees did it have?
I don't know at the time, sir, but I believe it was between 10 and 20.
Did it even have the resources to do the review under the Secretary's accelerated time frame?
Yes. Remember, the loan programs professionals make use of outside advisors as well.
Well, I want to resolve a discrepancy here. You stated that Solyndra was accelerated per Secretary Chu's policy, and yet in your testimony you state that Solyndra proceeded, and I quote, on the exact timeline that had been developed under the Bush administration. Which is it? And can you clarify this?
Well, I don't think those two statements are incompatible. The career staff in the Loan Programs Office I identified the March time frame as to when they would come back to the Credit Committee when the proposal was originally sent back to them.
You mentioned earlier when I just came in that you're private equity, or you worked on Wall Street, or what did you?
A bit of everything.
Okay, so you've looked at businesses and you've seen if they're worthy or not. In that capacity, would you lend $500 million to this company? And the information.
I am by training and background both a venture capitalist and a hedge fund investor, but I'm in no position really to second guess, having not been there, what the transaction was that occurred. What I can tell you is this. Extensive due diligence was done across multiple years on all of the relevant characteristics that would go into a typical project financing.
Okay. If we could look at slide 10. Could someone pull that up? I'd like to ask you about this, the OMB guy. Given the time pressures we were under to sign off on Solyndra, we don't have time to change this model. This is what they're saying between each other. As long as we make it crystal clear to DOE that this was only in the interest of time and that there was no precedent set, then I'm okay with it. But we also need to make sure they don't jam us on later deals so there isn't time to negotiate those two. This was on August 27th. Biden was to do an appearance very soon after that. The stimulus was done on September 4th. What do you have to say about this?
Well, I wasn't involved in this, but based on what's on the screen here, I think this has to do with the closing of the transaction. And OMB's role at that point is to make sure that the credit subsidy score is correct from a budgeting cost perspective. It is not about the loan overall at that stage. It's about the credit subsidy score. And my understanding, having talked to staff in preparation for this hearing, is that staff was very comfortable and had no hesitation as to its final determination of the credit subsidy score, which, as I mentioned earlier, the credit subsidy score has actually increased as a result of OMB's analysis, and DOE concurred with that. So the credit subsidy score was made more conservative in that period of time as it was signed off in preparation for closing of the loan.
Well, she said there was a problem with the model, and do you think that's a problem in giving out?
Again, not having been there, not knowing the author's intent, what I can tell you is in preparation for this hearing, I've talked to OMB career staff, and there was no hesitation that they expressed to me as to whether the final credit subsidy score was indeed one that they were comfortable with. And it was increased as a result of the OMB analysis, and DOE agreed with that increase.
Well, the Solyndra
gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Christensen is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to also just thank our ranking members for insisting that we hear from the Solyndra officials. It's important that we get the fullest picture, especially since my reading of the testimony suggests that DOE and OMB appear to have done adequate due diligence, and that part of the collapse of Solyndra at least appears to be due to forces beyond their control. Nevertheless, the subcommittee has the responsibility to determine all the facts and apply relevant lessons learned going forward. But I also think it's important that we accept that innovation always carries some degree of risk, and also important that we not use the failure in this instance or even others as an excuse to turn away from the pursuit of green energy, a green economy, and the U.S. leadership in this area. So my questions, then let me start with to Mr. Silver. I'd like to ask you to take me through DOE's monitoring system for loans as it existed in 2009, 2010, and how it exists now. I do want to point out that a series of GAO and DOE Inspector General reports dating to the Bush administration have identified problems with management and controls in the DOE loan guarantee program. So it's fair to point out that these programs did not begin with you. Still, it's important to ensure accountability for how this program is run. So the first question, after the Solyndra loan guarantee was first closed in 2009, what mechanisms did DOE use to monitor Solyndra's cash flow?
In addition to our origination teams, our credit teams, our legal teams, our technical teams, and our regulatory teams, we also have a portfolio management group. And their responsibility is to monitor transactions post-closing against the covenants in each individual transaction.
Were there site visits to California? Or?
There are regular site visits.
How did DOE's practices change when the loan was restructured in 2011?
Well, the principal difference was that in addition to picking up certain additional collateral for the loan, we negotiated and took an observer's seat on this particular transaction. Now, I should say, Congresswoman, that that's an unusual thing to do and to have. Typically, lenders, including lenders in the private sector, do not have board seats or even generally board observer seats, but we thought it was important to do that in order to be able to continue to monitor it.
So despite this ongoing monitoring, it does not appear that DOE anticipated Solyndra's deep financial troubles this summer. So, Mr. Silver, how would you explain this, that you were not able to anticipate the deep financial troubles?
Well, as several members have mentioned, and as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the precipitous price drop of both silicon and panel prices has deeply contributed to that. I should note that we too anticipated that there would need to be, additional support for this company in the out years as it continued to grow, and that was built into the restructuring transaction as well.
So I know that Solyndra was raided by the FBI and the DOE Inspector General following the bankruptcy announcement. Do you know why this raid occurred?
No, ma'am, I have no idea. I'm not part of that investigation or privy to it.
Did Solyndra ever mislead DOE that you know of? Do you have any reason to think that the company was not providing you with all appropriate information?
I have no reason sitting here today to believe that we were misled.
So what lessons have you learned? Have DOE's loan monitoring practices changed since you began as director of the loan guarantee program in the fall of 2009? Do you anticipate making further changes in response to the loss of taxpayer funds as a result of the Solyndra bankruptcy?
Well, the entire program has changed, Congresswoman. When I got there were about 35 people. We now have between 180 and 200 people, deep bench strength in each of the areas that I identified. We built out, among other things, an electronic portal which permits applicants to submit electronically, thereby capturing all their data and shrinking the intake time. I might mention as an aside that we won a national award for that software. We built out a complete records management piece which had not existed heretofore, and we will continue to make additional improvements as we can.
Thank you for this information. One of the key roles for the committee moving forward will be to understand why DOE did not foresee the Solyndra bankruptcy earlier. You've helped us with at least some information regarding that, and whether there are ways to improve the system for monitoring projects that benefit the program. But thank you for your responses.
Thank you, ma'am.
I yield.
Lady yields back. The gentlelady from Tennessee is recognized for 5 minutes. Ms. Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for being here with us. Just a couple of questions, and I know you've been here for quite a while. I've got an email, a couple of emails I want to put up here. Mr. Silver, you said you had worked on Wall Street and...
No, I didn't work specifically on Wall Street.
Okay.
Midtown, but for a hedge fund, yes.
For a hedge fund, okay. So you're pretty used to reviewing companies and looking at the history of companies and deciding if something is going to be a good investment or not, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I would imagine that DOE had a file that was passed on to you when you came into your position. Did it have a file that contained the different loans that had been approved and the tracking on those, the accountabilities to the taxpayer? Because, you know, we're about fairness for the taxpayer.
Yes, as are we, and yes, there were files.
Okay, so you did have files. Okay. Mr. Zients, did you get a file at OMB on Solyndra and the due diligence that was done and the process that was followed?
I became involved with Solyndra around the period of the restructuring.
Not my question. Did you receive a file that goes back to day one?
No.
So you had no knowledge of the history.
Well, OMB's role here, as I've talked about before, is specifically on FCRA around the credit subsidy.
Not my question. Did you get a file? Was there some history of the process?
I was briefed by our staff on the history of the process.
But nothing in writing?
I've reviewed documents that the staff produced, but there's
OMB,
not one comprehensive file that I have been
There is no Solyndra loan guarantee file at OMB.
My assumption would be, although I've not seen it, that the career staff, yes, maintains a file on Solyndra. That is not something.
But you have not seen that?
No.
Okay. All right. Let's put this up. Now, there are two emails here, and let's talk about these for a minute. The first one, August 19th, an email between the DOE staff dated the 19th stated that, quote, we still have a major outstanding issue, the issue of working capital assumptions. Mr. Silver, I assume you know a little bit about that, has been a major issue repeatedly raised since December 08. I want to pay attention to those dates. Now, let's look at the next day. There is an email. Now, Mr. Markey was concerned that no one seemed to be Carniac and have a silver ball. Well, it looks like we might have had somebody that was doing a little bit of looking ahead. So let's talk about this. That email says the issue of working capital remains unresolved. The issue is cash balances, not cost. Solyndra seems to agree that the model runs out of cash in September 2011, even in the base case without any stress. This is a liquidity issue. Mr. Silver, what do you say to that?
Well, that would not be surprising in a modeling scenario. That is, in fact, exactly what you use modeling to do, to identify where there are holes in the project. It also does.
Have you ever seen this email?
I have not seen this specific.
This is the first time you've seen this email. Were you aware that the liquidity issue had arisen?
I was aware that the liquidity.
Was that in the file?
I don't honestly remember if that was in the file or not. Again, I arrived in November.
Just remember you're under oath.
I'm deeply aware of that.
Okay, let's go on to the rest of this.
Just to be clear, though, I arrived in November of 2009, and since the loan was already issued at that point, we essentially move into the role that a bank managing a mortgage would. We're managing the loan.
And I appreciate that. That's why I asked if you were passed a file. My assumption would be, and you know, Mr. Chairman, my goodness, I would think if we've got loan guarantee programs going in different agencies and there is not a comprehensive file that will give the history of that would show the due diligence, that would document this, that would show the orderly process that was followed, or as Mr. Waxman was so concerned about the vetting process, my goodness, we should be reviewing every one of these loan programs. Are they certainly, is OMB not looking at this on a comprehensive basis to make certain that individuals are meeting their timelines, that someone is following this, or are they just sending this money out in droves and nobody is doing the follow-up? So we'll want to do that. Let's look at the rest of this email. And I'm quoting
Chairman,
again.
with all
How
due
can
respect,
we
I believe
advance a
she's hectoring
project?
the witness. And
let the gentlelady finish
how we
her
can
testimony.
advance a project that hasn't
Time's
funded
expired.
working capital requirements and that generates a working capital shortfall of $50 million when working capital assumptions are entered into this model. Now, that was the question that was asked. And to all of my colleagues, I just think that, you know, when you look at this and you see that someone at DOE was asking those questions and was looking at that modeling, it should cause us to seek to do a little bit more review and oversight. And I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Ms. Schakowsky is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I agree that we should closely examine what went wrong and how the loan guarantee process can be improved if it needs improvement. But I am very concerned here that this is an attack on a program that, let's face it, when you invest in various innovative and novel technologies that we need to do, is it not true, Mr. Silver, that there is some inherent risk associated with each of these deals, not with just Solyndra?
There is risk, almost by definition, in the identification of the innovation itself, in building out that innovation at scale. There is an old adage that every bank wants to be the first bank to do your second loan. The program is intended to be the first bank to do the first loan.
You know, my colleagues certainly obviously want to make this a political issue, but they also talk about not wanting to pick winners and losers. And for heaven's sakes, as my colleague said, we are investing right now billions of dollars in oil and gas companies. We're investing, as my colleague Mr. Markey said, in a questionable technology, a risky technology called nuclear. But I want to know that in selecting projects for loan guarantees, what efforts have you taken to ensure that you have appropriately diversified our portfolio?
Well, thank you for that question. I want to be quite clear on this. The loan guarantee program does not perceive itself to be in the business of picking winners or losers at all. In fact, the marketplace is the place to do that, and as someone who's come directly from that, I certainly support and attest to that. We don't actually look at projects that have not already garnered or will, as part of the process, attract substantial private capital. In fact, private capital is one of the bedrock requirements for the issuance of a loan guarantee. The question isn't really so much are we picking winners and losers, because we not only, as you point out, invest across a diversified portfolio. We invest in wind, solar, geothermal, biofuels, and the like. We also invest in directly competing technologies within those sectors because it is the program objective, the program mandate, to introduce a wide range of innovative technologies so that the marketplace, seeing these projects, can then replicate them on their own. And when the markets are in those areas, we exit. But the real issue is, how are we going to pick, if we're not going to if we're not going to be significant participants in this, then how are we going to build these American companies at all? Because China and the rest of the world are spending billions and billions of dollars to build out these industries.
You know, a September 2nd, 2011 Forbes article noted that this program should be judged based on its entire portfolio as opposed to one individual loan. I wonder if you could talk about that. Just put this particular loan in context, either one of you.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do so. We have invested, as I said, in a wide range of technologies. I do want to point out that the vast majority of our investments have been in generation projects rather than in manufacturing projects. And the reason that's important is because generation projects have what are called offtake agreements through PPAs, power purchase agreements typically with utilities, which means that the power that is being created, the clean energy power that's being created, is already contracted for. And it has the generation projects, which make up the vast majority of our portfolio, have a vastly different risk profile than manufacturing projects do. We've actually only done 4 manufacturing projects in the 40-odd projects we've done across the programs.
What would be the consequences, do you think, if this investigation ended up in a conclusion that making investments in companies that do alternative energy, solar in particular, what would the consequences for our country be if we were to divest of those kinds of loans?
I think the consequences would be profound, and they would be profoundly negative. We are competing with countries around the world who see this as one of the largest industrial sectors and industrial opportunities of the next generation. And if we cede the field, if we walk off the field, there is no way that we can succeed, because these industries are different in kind than perhaps the software industry. You need platform companies here in order to be able to succeed. As I pointed out earlier in my testimony, 5 of the largest solar panel companies are in China, 7 are in Asia, the 8th is in Europe, and there are only 2 here. You need to build out at scale. You need to deploy commercially, because that's how you build out the supply chains in these countries. You have to create what economists call demand pull. And if you don't do that, you can't keep those supply chains alive, and they can't in turn reduce their costs. So consequently, we have underinvested in the supply chains in this country in clean energy for decades, and we are only now beginning to catch up.
Thank you. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Gingrey, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I first off want to make a statement in regard to a couple of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle comparing Solyndra, this bankrupt company, totally unproven technology, to the Southern Company. I take a little exception to that comparison. Southern Company owns Mississippi Power, Alabama Power, Georgia Power, among others, and employs literally thousands of people, is closely regulated by the Georgia Public Service Commission, has 3 nuclear power facilities, 2 in Georgia, 1 in Alabama, with 5 reactors that have been in production for years. So this loan guarantee to start up 2 additional reactors at Plant Vogtle by the Southern Company, comparing that loan guarantee to this loan guarantee for a company like Solyndra is a little disingenuous. But let me go ahead and start the questioning with you, Mr. Silver. When you met with committee staff in March of this year, you represented that the restructuring agreement your agency reached with Solyndra in 2011, I believe February, had positioned the DOT and the United States taxpayer for maximum recovery. But the company is now bankrupt, and it turns out the government is now in a second position to Solyndra's investors in the deal, those that put up an additional $75 million in that restructuring. Why did the DOT allow Solyndra's investors to be first in line to recover rather than the taxpayer? Under the Energy Policy Act, isn't your #1 duty to protect the taxpayer funds?
It is absolutely one of our essential concerns to focus as much as we can on the security of the taxpayer monies. And that's why we reached the decision we did. A restructuring is always, by definition, a decision among a set of tough choices, because it means, by definition, a company is struggling. The fundamental question that we were trying to answer.
Yeah, but let me interrupt you. If you have the legal authority to make those tough choices, the Energy Policy Act of 2005 expressly states that, and I quote, "The obligation or loan guarantee shall be subject to the condition that it is not subordinate
to other financing. This language makes Congress's intent seem pretty clear to me, to protect the taxpayers' money. Isn't this exactly what the Solyndra restructuring did? Make the taxpayers' interests subject to other financing. Doesn't the Solyndra restructuring violate the law?
Congressman, I'm not a lawyer, but I will tell you that the decision was reviewed by the Loan Guarantee Council, by DOE Council, and by OMB Council. And the conclusion of that analysis was that projects needed to be in the senior secured position at issuance, as indeed this loan was, as indeed every of our loans is. But I will tell you, while not a lawyer, I will tell you as a businessman that if you do not permit restructurings of transactions and the tools required to do that, lenders will be in
let me interrupt. I understand that. I understand that in the private sector, and of course you came from the private sector. I think you mentioned earlier involved in hedge fund activity and that sort of thing, and a lot of wheeling and dealing, and that's permitted. But in this particular instance, now you said you received a legal memorandum on DOE's interpretation of the Energy Policy Act, correct?
As I said, counsel in the loan program, at the General Counsel of DOE and at OMB all reviewed this matter.
Who reviewed the memorandum?
Which lawyers?
Yes.
I'm not sure which on the staff.
But it was approved by the General Counsel. You just don't know which lawyer.
I don't know which staff lawyers did the work. No, sir.
Okay. But it was approved by the General Counsel.
It was certainly reviewed.
I want to discuss one part of the legal opinion. Will the committee clerk please put the language from the statute on the screen? I believe that is slide number 1. Yeah. All right. Just look at what it says, and let me read it to you because I'm kind of in the corner here and I can't read the monitor. But number 3, subordination. The obligation shall be subject to the condition that the obligation, the loan, is not subordinate to other financing. That's part of the Energy Policy Act of 2005. The DOE legal opinion seems to be based on the use of the word is in the statute. The legal opinion states, and I quote, "The reading of the provision is reinforced by the use of the word is, which we viewed as confirming the intent that the condition be satisfied at a single point in time," meaning you can't subordinate when the guarantee is issued, but you can at restructuring. Is DOE basing its opinion that taxpayers can be second in line to investors based on what the meaning of is? Wasn't DOE tortured interpretation exactly the opposite of that plain language in the statute?
I'm not a lawyer, sir. I relied on counsel's judgment on that.
You didn't have a very good lawyer, and I think you got bad advice. I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I have some questions, but I'm shocked that my Republican colleagues be concerned about somebody coming from the private sector to the government payroll. I thought that's what we needed, more folks from the private sector. So, you know, I don't like wheeling dealing either, but it sounds terrible when you hear it. But Mr. Silver and Mrs. Zients, I want to ask some questions about that legal basis of restructuring the loan, and if you could put that section back up that my colleague from Georgia had, because that's the series of questions I want to ask about. The committee's investigation revealed that there appears to have been 2 major legal questions under discussion at the Solyndra restructuring was going forward. The first, to the extent which the DOE had authority to subordinate the U.S. creditor position to private investors, and the second was whether the restructuring should be considered a modification of the loan. First question, Mr. Silver, what does it mean to subordinate an interest?
It means that new capital coming in would be in a prime position on exit, depending on the structure of the exit. I might point out here, Congressman, that typically in a restructuring in which new capital comes in, and you have to ask yourself the very obvious question, why would any new capital come into a troubled situation if they did not come in a prime position? But here, typically in the private sector, and in loans in other federal agencies, the prime trumps other subordinated capital all the way through. In the transaction we structured, we actually were able to ensure that it was only in the event of liquidation that that would be a senior position. In the event that the company is sold as a turnkey operation, which is still possible, it will not be in a senior position.
Okay. There is language in Section 1702 that my colleague pointed out of the Energy Policy Act that seems designed to prevent the subordination of government's interest in these loans. It reads, the obligation shall be subject to the condition that the obligation is not subordinate to other financing. But your legal staff determined that there was a legitimate legal basis to subordinate the governor's interest in Solyndra in this case. Can you describe for us your staff's legal rationale?
Yes, as best I can, not being a lawyer, and that is that the judgment was made that the law required that the loans at issuance be in a senior secured position, as I said, indeed, as Solyndra was. And, in fact, I want to assure the committee, as all the transactions that we've closed to date are, but that in the event that a project struggled, and there's no surprise as to the fact that projects struggle from time to time, we had the authority to figure out other solutions. I should remind the committee that absent the ability to do this, this company would have closed then with the 1,100 jobs lost then, and the likelihood of any real recovery to the taxpayer being relatively de minimis, because at the time the loan was restructured, although the physical building had been built, the plant had not been fitted out. It is also an adage of project finance, and particularly restructuring work in project finance, that the value of a completed project is infinitely greater than an incomplete project.
The documents provided to the committee by the OMB suggest that your staff may have had some concerns about this approach. However, ultimately you did not step in and stop DOA from subordinating the interest. Why not?
The OMB's role here is in oversight of the program, and OMB's career staff and lawyers, and again, I'm not a lawyer, determined that... You know,
I keep hearing that, but I don't know if a
General
law
Counsel
license bestows anything on common sense.
General Counsel's determination was that this was that the DOE approach was reasonable.
Congressman, if I could just add one thing to that. People have asked about the 75 million subordination. I want to make it clear that the $1 billion of equity, of private equity that went into this company originally is wiped out in that scenario. We're not talking about all of that private capital coming forward, just the newest piece of money that came in order to provide the company with a fighting chance to restructure its operations.
Okay. The second issue, legal issue raised by the restructuring was whether it was a modification of the loan agreement. My understanding is that the Federal Credit Reporting Act generally prohibits loan modifications that increase taxpayer cost, but the definition of modification does not include a restructuring to work out a troubled loan or a loan that is in imminent default. Is my understanding correct?
This situation was ultimately deemed a workout for two reasons. First, that the company was in imminent default, which it clearly DOE had determined it was. And secondly, that it was in the best interest of taxpayers to restructure the loan as opposed to liquidation. So when those two conditions are met, a loan is considered a workout in that scenario.
Okay. So it was a workout and not a modification?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Silver, what was the DOE's rationale for determining that restructuring did not constitute a modification?
Exactly as Mr. Zients has indicated.
Ms. Zients, your staff has also expressed concern over whether the restructuring constituted modification. What analysis did your staff go through making the determination that the change was not a legal modification of the loan?
At the beginning of the process, when we first heard about the financial troubles, the staff's orientation is going to be that there could be a modification. As the staff worked with DOE to understand the dire financial situation and the fact that the company was in imminent default, and that DOE's analysis was reasonable, that the taxpayers were better served through a restructuring rather than a liquidation, OMB career staff determined that it was indeed a workout.
Okay. Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Murphy, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Silver, I just want to get a couple of things on this in terms of your expertise. When you're managing director of Core Capital Partners, had you ever managed something, a loan of this size before?
Core Capital Partners was a venture fund, sir, so we didn't provide debt. We provided equity.
You provided equity. Have you ever provided equity of this size?
Not individually in a loan at Core Capital, but in other configurations. Yes.
At Tiger Management, had you ever?
Yes, certainly.
So you're used to that. You're used to reviewing these things. And I go back to this on slide 5, if someone could put up slide 5. In this, when they had, in August of 2009, someone wrote this, I can't quite read that up there, but wrote this in terms of saying that some issues with regard to the concerns about the health of the company there. Major outstanding issues was the point in 2008, but it says, an email the following day states the issue of working capital remains unresolved. The issue is cash balances, not costs. Solyndra seems to agree that the model runs out of cash September 2011, even in the base case without any stress. This is a liquidity issue. When did you become aware of that email?
Well, as I said, I've not seen this specific email. That email was written in August of 2009. I arrived in November of 2009. There would have been no reason for me to know of its existence while we worked on the company. But
so you would not have known of anybody's concern that they thought there wasn't enough capital to keep the company
certainly
going?
the career staff monitoring this was deeply aware of the issues.
And your job is to have oversight over the staff?
My job is to have oversight over the staff.
So you're saying you had oversight, but you were not aware of a memo saying this company didn't have the money to keep going?
Well, I'm not aware of this particular email, but certainly I was aware of the company's status and situation.
At that time, and yet still things are going through.
Well, the loan had already gone through, sir.
But even what I'm concerned about here is, as we're looking at this, and the next we could move forward to the restructuring. Now, the restructuring is how much?
Maybe I should clarify exactly what the loan was for. We provided a loan guarantee to support the construction of a physical plant called Fab 2.
And when was that approved?
That was what the loan was for. It was approved in September. And that plant actually was delivered on time and on budget. The way the loan worked,
on time, on budget for a company that staff was saying couldn't function, regardless of what they had in terms of a building.
No, that doesn't actually say, sir, that the company can't function. That says that there will be a liquidity issue in 2011, several years.
Meaning they run out of money.
No, meaning that they will have to address that issue.
And if they don't, they run out of money.
Conceivably, yes.
But I'm just trying to establish, your job is you've handled loans like this. Would you offer a loan to a company that says they're not going to have the money to pay it back unless they make some changes?
Well, again, I wasn't there when this loan was issued, sir, but what I can tell you
is... But in the time you've been there, you became aware of this. Did you begin to address these issues with Solyndra to say, show me the money?
Well, we talked. The staff talked with the company on a regular basis.
I really want you to stop throwing everybody else under the bus. I hear you throwing all your staff under the bus. I want to know, you're in charge, you've handled loans of this size, and now you're saying it's everybody else's fault but you, except you're in charge. You tell me what you as a person in charge did with $500 million of taxpayers' money, now saying it's all my staff's fault, I didn't know, I can't do anything about it. You tell me what you're going to tell the taxpayers. Well, we're in the hole for so much money in this country, and you're dealing with this in a very casual, cavalier way. Whose fault is it?
Well, sir, first let me say that the 200-odd professionals working in the loan guarantee program are exceptional professionals.
And you throw them all under the bus. It's a pretty bumpy ride. But you're the driver, Mr. Silver. You're the driver. And now you're saying this is restructured. And going back to the slide that says the obligation shall be subject to the condition that the obligation is not subordinate to other financing, and now it gets restructured so the taxpayers don't get their money back.
The restructuring, any restructuring, Congressman, is based on a binary decision as to what is the better outcome for a recovery, a liquidation, a sale of assets in a moment in time, or a restructuring.
Who is it that made the decision that this act passed into law by the federal government was going to not be adhered to? Who made that decision?
Well, as I said, it was reviewed by legal counsel for the loan program.
So you have no responsibility in this either. So we're throwing him under the bus too?
I'm not a lawyer, sir. I rely on counsel.
Oh, you're throwing her under the bus too? Did the Secretary of Energy have anything to do with this decision? Or is he under the bus too?
Not to my knowledge.
So no one's responsible. This is an incredible organization you work for. No one in the federal government is responsible for $500 million of taxpayers' money. This is phenomenal. What do you do for a living? Why do you, if you don't know what's happening, everybody else is to blame. What do we go back and tell our constituents who have to work hard with so many people in this country in poverty, so many people in problems? We're saying, if this federal agency is saying, we don't take any responsibility. It's everybody else's fault.
We work to the fullest of our capabilities, Congressman, to ensure that these projects are as de-risked as possible.
I understand, but now the taxpayers are on the hook for this.
As was pointed out earlier, there are always challenges in investing in innovation, and I should point out that Congress, through the appropriation of $2.4 billion of credit subsidies.
When did this company actually get their check?
It doesn't work like that, Congressman. They draw against the loan.
Exactly. And at any point, you could have stopped it when you found out the information that they couldn't exist. And that was under your watch, Mr. Silver.
Our transaction, our loan, was for the construction of a physical plant.
And at some point, when you realized they couldn't function anymore in that physical plant, that's when you step in and take leadership and stop throwing your staff under the bus. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, but a question Mr. Murphy is really asking: should someone be fired, Mr. Silver? Should anybody be fired? Yes or no?
The people in the loan guarantee program at the Department of Energy, at OMB, our colleagues at OMB and the like have worked.
Okay, so you're saying no one should be fired?
I'm saying that we are doing the best job we know how to do.
All right. I understand what you're saying. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we could have slide 1 again. Yes, I am concerned about this situation, but I would point out in paragraphs 1 and 2, it references that no guarantee shall be made unless, which gives some flexibility, but in paragraph 3 of section 1702, it says the obligation shall be subject to condition that the obligation is not subordinate to other financing. Have you read the memorandum of law on this?
I have not read the full memorandum, no, but I've been briefed by counsel.
Would it shock you to know that if you read it and you pay attention to what's being said, and I have it right here, be happy to give you a copy with my notes on it if you want them, it looks like it's a law school project where you're told to come up with an answer. Here's the question, give me the right answer, defend it the best you can. That's what it looks like, because under this analysis, what it says is that if we close the loan in the morning and at lunch somebody has an epiphany and says, you know what, I think that we should see if we can get some more money from somebody else, and we're going to subordinate that money, and we're not going to follow this paragraph, because it doesn't, there is no line. And in fact, somebody raised that issue. The memorandum points out somebody raised the issue, should there be a line between when the loan is granted and possible default? And they said, no, that's not necessary, because the law doesn't say that. You can change it any time you want to if the Secretary thinks it's appropriate. Does that make good common sense? As Mr. Green pointed out to you, you don't have to be a lawyer to know good common sense. Does it make common sense that the Congress of the United States, responsible for setting our legislative policy, would say that you are not to subordinate, but under the interpretation of your lawyers, they could subordinate after lunch for a loan closed in the morning? Does that make good common sense to you, sir?
Well, Congressman, what makes sense to me is to ensure that we have the tools available to us to do whatever is necessary in a troubled situation to secure the taxpayer's interest.
Even if it's in violation of the law, and what common sense would tell you, the common English always trumps legal mumbo-jumbo, and the common English makes it clear you're not to subordinate. But in January, when you were at the helm, your people subordinated $75 million of this money, American taxpayer dollars, to private investors. And part of the deal was they were going to invest more money in August. Isn't that true?
That is true.
And they did not do so. Isn't that also true?
That is true.
And when did your observer tell you that they weren't going to invest any more money so that you might have been able to anticipate the bankruptcy? When did your observer tell you that?
In late July.
And weren't we trying to get information from you all at that time, or was that the other fella?
I don't know what you're referring to.
The documents that we were requesting ultimately had a subpoena. I guess that was...
We've sent you, as I said, almost 35,000 pages of material.
All right. And have you, just so we know, you've got all these other loans out there, 4 to manufacturers, which would be in a similar situation to this one. Have you subordinated any of that money?
No other transactions have had subordinations. I would go further and say that of the 2, there are only 2 deals that have actually closed and completed construction, and both of those are repaying on a timely basis.
All right. And did you look, if you didn't look at the memorandum, attached to the memorandum, there's all kinds of charts on how Solyndra is going to make money. Did you look at those financial charts?
Sure, I've seen the company's financials.
All right. You earlier testified that part of the reason Solyndra went under was the fact that the Chinese were able to make their product cheaper and the Europeans stopped buying. Now, while it may have gotten worse, wasn't that also true in January when you restructured this loan?
It has been true for the last several years.
Okay. In that, I would have to ask you then, when you look at these numbers, how in the world, if you know that and your analysts have told you that, how in the world could you anticipate that profits at Solyndra would double next year? Because that's in all the models that are attached to the legal memorandum.
I'll leave it to the company's management team to describe their financial projections, but what I will say to you...
wait a minute. They've got you are concerned enough you put an observer on the board and you subordinated American taxpayer dollars, but you're going to leave it to their management to determine how they can say that they're going to double it? Doesn't that sound like that's not common sense again?
Well, with all due respect, revenues are not actually the driver of how a loan or loan guarantee would necessarily get paid. What we focus on are cash flows, and those can be managed in a variety of different ways.
But you would acknowledge that that if their model was somewhat weak to begin with, and I recognize there's risk whenever you're doing something new, but if their model was weak to begin with and then the market gets worse, doesn't that mean that maybe we should have just not thrown good money after bad? Because now we're in a worse position in the bankruptcy courts to get our money back, are we not?
Well, at the time of...
Are we in worse position than we would have been if we had just let them go into bankruptcy Chapter 11 last January? We are we not?
That will depend, not necessarily. That will depend on the outcome of the bankruptcy. As I tried to indicate before, when you're looking at this issue and admitting that there are no good choices, one of the issues is liquidation, and you determine a liquidation
Is it
value.
the administration's policy that bankruptcy is a good thing?
I can't speak for the administration, but common sense
Is it your
suggests
position?
that it's not.
I would agree with you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Time has expired. Gentleman from California, Mr. Bilbray, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, before I go on, I'd like to just address the ranking member of this committee, because I hope she recognizes, and we all recognize, this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. When we're talking about this is specifically a threat to the legislative process. When you can have an attorney play this word game, and does that mean that Democrat or Republican, when they specifically direct in legislation, that we now have to say not only it will not happen, but we must say it will not and shall never be allowed to happen? Do we have to play this word game? Because I don't think it's a Democrat or Republican issue. I think this is an issue about the law is the law, and I don't care how convoluted an attorney wants to do it. This doesn't pass the smell test in any way in the world. So I just think this is really an affront on both sides of the aisle by this manipulation. And just admit it that we tried to get the job done and we crossed over a line that to a common sense person and anybody rational would say you crossed the line of what the law specifically said. Now, that aside, there's a lot of people talk about solar power here. Some of us have worked at siting solar factories here. Mr. Silver, are you comfortable, first of all, with the thin film technology that was chosen by this company? Did you have any concerns about them using thin film technology?
Congressman, I am, first of all, not a solar technical analyst, but I am highly comfortable with the fact that the solar experts at the Department of Energy, of whom there are many, and the independent engineers, which were well-known and well-respected firms, were qualified.
Were you informed that there's been more false starts and more failures in thin film than any other form of photovoltaic production?
I don't know that to be true or not, but...
Okay. Were you aware that as we talk about China, that China has concentrated almost extensively in polycrystal technology and avoid thin film?
Well, China has focused on the market segment you're describing in part because it's a very cost-effective way to mass produce those panels. The Solyndra technology was designed in its time and place to circumvent or to overcome two fundamental challenges, the very high price of polysilicon and the installation costs, which they refer to as balance.
And they also have the historical problem of a lack of durability and the loss of proficiency of thin film as opposed to mono and poly technologies. But my question to you, you're a businessman. You're looking at a company. Did you review their proposal for the construction of their factory, the technology that the siting of it, the plan development of it, and its related costs and oversight?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Did you look at where they were talking about building this factory, how they were building it, and the related issues of the cost of just building the factory?
No, sir, because the loan was issued before I arrived at the department.
When you went and renegotiated it, did you take a look at what was being proposed?
Well, at that point, the plant was largely built, although it was not, as I say, fitted out.
Okay. Did anybody down the line raise the issue that the proposal was to build the facility in the state of California in the Bay Area in a non-attainment area? Can you think of as a businessman anywhere in America where you probably have more regulatory obstructionism to the construction of a manufacturing operation than you would have in a non-attainment area in the state of California?
I'm not qualified to answer that question, but what I can say is that the investors that backed this company and the management team that originally led it must have concluded that this was the right place to do it.
Mr. Silva, are you aware of anybody in your department that have notified grant applicants that if they want to go get the grant, that their production should be moved out of the state of California to a state that has less regulatory obstructionism?
We don't issue grants in the loan program, sir, but I'm not aware of that, no.
Okay, well, maybe we ought to talk about the fact. Let me just point out. You were talking, this grant application was asking to take 30 acres of agricultural land in the state of California in a non-attainment area. It was going to be required to be able to go, not just to the DOD in the U.S., but having to get the Environmental Quality Act under CEQA for the California, has to get a permit from the city, air quality, from the Bay Area air quality, which is a non-attainment area with some of the strictest air pollution regs in the entire world. It was going to require a general permit for discharge and stormwater, which means that not only did you have the California environmental agencies involved, not only did you have the State Water Quality Control Board involved, you had the local regional water quality control board that you had to get a permit from. The fact is that the California Department of Occupational Safety, which has some of the most restrictive regulations in the world, you had to get a permit from. You had the hazardous waste generation, which California, again, under HAZMAT, has some of the most restrictive funds. Then you get into wastewater discharge. And these are just some of the permits down the line. Nobody in your department or when they reviewed this raised the issue that this is not only a terrible place to try to site a facility, but you're proposing, didn't anybody raise the issue of why build a whole new facility rather than moving into an existing abandoned facility in a state that has 12% unemployment and huge empty resources? Anybody even talk about the question of why would you build a new facility when there's warehouses available? Mr. Chairman? Would you answer the question?
Time has expired, but you're welcome, Mr. Silver, to answer the question.
Sure, I will.
Yes or no?
To the best of my knowledge. Again, at the risk of repeating myself, since I wasn't there, I don't know what the nature of the discussions were, but I can tell you that applicants for loan guarantees are required to have all of their siting permits and other kinds of permits in place by the time the project is undertaken.
And all of it was stated down that it will attain it before construction when they get into the line. And all I got to say is somebody who's citing, we're citing existing warehouses. It's absurd with the kind of vacancy we had in the state of California for anybody even talk about or come to you or any government agency and say we want to build a whole new virgin area on ag land. I yield back, Mr.
Time, the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for calling this hearing. You know, we've been pressing on this issue and asking a lot of questions about this Solyndra loan program for months now on this subcommittee. But I think it's really important that we have this hearing now because while Solyndra was touted as really one of the poster childs by President Obama of his first stimulus bill, and clearly there is a lot of evidence that shows that this was something that the White House really wanted to move through quickly. And the emails indicate that. But while this was one of the poster children of the first stimulus bill, the president right now is touting what I call son of stimulus, another bill to come through, spend more taxpayer money, to do more things like this. And in fact, if you look at some of the issues that we've raised about this loan program, some of these projects that were funded by stimulus, just Solyndra alone was touted to create 3,000 jobs. The president touted that. It's going to be a great success story. And, of course, we've seen the failure there. And a lot of us are questioning this kind of double-down son of stimulus approach where they're going to come back and do more of this kind of same failed policy of just spending money we don't have. And, of course, the president said in front of our chamber last week, pass the bill now. We hadn't even seen the bill. President didn't even give us the text of the bill, and he said, pass the bill now. Called on the American people. to ask us to pass the bill now. I hope you understand now why a lot of us are real skeptical when the president says pass a bill now, because he did that with the stimulus bill, and we see the failure there. He did that with the health care bill. We're still unearthing problems there. So when the president says pass a bill, you can wonder why some of us say, let me read the bill first and let's look at the details. But now when we get specifically to this issue of what happened with Solyndra, Mr. Silver, I know you've testified that you weren't in your position until November of 2009. When you came in, you've acknowledged there was a file on Solyndra. Did you read that file?
I read through all the materials for the entire program when I arrived.
Did you see the concerns that were being raised by your own agency back then, prior to your coming, that under what they were looking at, Solyndra could go bankrupt by September of 2011?
I certainly saw all of the materials that were, related to that discussion. I need to reemphasize, Congressman, that the loan guarantee was specifically for the construction of a physical factory, which was done, and the way that works.
Well, and look, it's your job. It's your job ultimately to go through that loan guarantee and see if there are things that meet the taxpayer interest.
That's correct.
But also, I think you need to also be aware of the way that the program's being implemented. After you came in, the Government Accountability Office did a report that was, I think, pretty scathing about your loan program. They actually made some recommendations. They pointed out some problems. They pointed out, again, after you came in, GAO put this report out. They pointed out that the loan program treated applicants inconsistently, favoring some and disadvantaging others. And they gave examples. Did you read this GAO report?
I did, Congressman, and if you'll give me a minute to respond to...
I can't give you that long. I don't have that much time.
To the GAO question. First, let me note that while the report did come out after I arrived, it covers the 2008 and 2009 time period, and so I was there for approximately 1 month.
So did you make any changes based on the problems that they pointed out?
We've actually made substantial changes as we've grown the organization.
All right, but let me ask you this. On the actual, because you were here, you were in your position after y'all did the restructuring of Solyndra's loan. Who made the decision to put the taxpayers in the back of the line and subordinate in violation of federal law? Who made that decision?
Well, first, Congressman, as I've said before, I don't know that it was in violation of federal law. There were multiple.
Someone made the decision. Did you make the decision?
There were a variety.
Subordinate?
There were a variety of legal.
Did you make it?
The loan program.
Yes, this is a yes or no question. Did you make the decision to subordinate the taxpayers and put them in the back of the line when the decision was made to restructure? Because you were there.
The question does not have a yes or no answer, Congressman.
So you don't know? You either made the decision or you didn't. I think that's a straightforward question. It really, and look, we have been asking for months now. In fact, we on this subcommittee asked your agency for some of these documents prior to the modification of the loan, prior to the restructuring, and y'all stonewalled us. As you're stonewalling right now, not refusing to answer a direct question, and $535 million of taxpayer money is at stake. Maybe if you would have given us that information back months ago when we asked for it, before you restructured, the taxpayers wouldn't be in the back of the line today. So you can understand, I would hope, why we're saying who made the decision to put the taxpayers in the back of the line. Can you get me that information if you can't answer it directly now?
I'm happy to meet with you to describe the.
No, I want in writing. I'm going to ask on behalf of the committee, Mr. Chairman, if you can get us in writing the names of the people in the decision-making process, and it might be multiple people, who made the decision to put the taxpayers in the back of the line, meaning subordinate the taxpayers in violation, what many of us think are in violation of law. I don't know what your counsel thinks, and your counsel may be part of this list. But I want to know if you're part of the list. I want to know if the secretary is part of the list. I want to know if anyone in the White House is part of that decision-making chain that said we're going to subordinate the taxpayers of the United States in restructuring this Solyndra loan. I think we deserve that answer, and I'm asking you to get that information, however many people it is. But somebody made that decision, or multiple people, but you can't say nobody made it because the decision was made. Would you at least agree with that and then get that information to this committee?
We will work with you to provide you what you need.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Time has expired. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Gardner, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses as well for your time today. And I would yield the 30 seconds to my colleague, Mr. Bilbray from California.
Mr. Silva, my biggest concern, I just want to say in closing, as somebody who supports solar energy, I think we got to keep the science, not the blind faith. And it appears to me that this entire process was driven more by an assumption that anything solar was good, and you could force it through, and it was all going to work out. And the lack of critical review for this production, I think, is the greatest threat for future solar. It's this kind of blind faith that we've got to avoid. This should be driven by science and good investment, not by an assumption that whatever is renewable obviously is going to be great. And I think this failure was driven more by that. I don't think it was a criminal intent. But that criminal intent, you can bust one guy. The trouble is, with this kind of prejudice for a technology blindly, there's more threat to that happening in the future, and not just financially, but the energy independence of this country and the competitiveness of this country, and that's what I'm critical on.
Congressman, I wholeheartedly agree with you that we ought to back the science, which is why a large group of sophisticated private investors who've had done their own due diligence, why the loan program staff from the 2007 through 2009 timeframe, using independent engineers, other outside advisors, and the solar experts at the Department of Energy, came to that conclusion.
Well, the record shows that there was political interjection, there was PR issues, there was the preconceived idea that if it was solar, it had to be a great package. And frankly, there is good stuff, there's bad stuff. And the greatest threat to the good stuff is allowing garbage to get through the system and being treated as if it's sacred rather than being critical about it. And it wasn't critical enough, and history has proven that there wasn't a critical review of this, and we got to make sure that doesn't happen again. I yield back to the gentleman.
Thank you. And reclaiming my time, Mr. Silver, I want to go back to this issue of the emails and the approval, the dismissal by the credit committee of this project. January 9th to Friday, 2009. An email was sent from the credit committee remanding the Solyndra application, calling it premature and citing a number of unresolved issues. In your testimony, you have said that this was over nothing big, no big deals, details, pretty common.
No, I didn't. I never said that, Congressman. What I said was the credit committee remanded it back for additional work, and due diligence was done on that work, and then it was brought forward in the time frame that they've. I should, if I may.
Well, let me just talk.
If I may, I'd like to just point out one other.
I'd
like to just point out one other thing, which is
reclaiming my time. This is my time. I'm sorry, because I want to talk about these matters of due diligence. On January 9th, what you said due diligence took place over. Let me read these to you. It's slide number 2, if you can put that on there. There is presently not an independent market study addressing long-term prospects for this specific company beyond the sales agreement already in place. Since the independent credit assessment raised the issue of obsolescence in marketing this project, it is important to have an independent analysis of that issue, as well as the current state of the competitive market. Point 2, while the sales agreement is said to have been analyzed by the outside legal advisor assigned to this case, the committee did not have access to this document. Point 3, there are questions regarding the nature and strength of the parent guarantee for the completion of the project. Point 4, while it is encouraging to see the apparent progress in the development of the project at the Fab 1 facility, there is concern regarding the scale-up of production assumed in the plan for Fab 2. That was in an email on January 9th. That's the areas of due diligence that you're saying that you did. And you did it by January 26th, a Monday, 2009?
I don't know what dates you're referring to.
These are the emails when the credit committee said, no, we're not going to do this. And then all of a sudden an email on just days later, 10 working days later.
Well, the gentleman, does the gentleman have copies of those emails?
Sure, I'm happy to provide.
I would appreciate that.
Sure.
We don't have copies of those emails, and I don't think the witness does either, and I'm getting a little lost here.
On January 9th, 2009, the credit committee sent an email. And I think if you go to slide 4, you can see what I'm talking about. There we go. 2009, talking about the credit committee remand Solyndra application, calling it premature. January 26th, we're approaching the beginning of the approval process. So the areas of due diligence that you said took place in 10 working days. These are pretty significant issues.
No, that's not accurate, Congressman. And if you'll give me just a moment to try to answer your question, there's actually an extended period of due diligence that takes place here. The credit committee, the first credit committee met. Then there was a several-month period before it met again, and I need to make sure this is clear because I don't think it is.
They didn't meet when they made their decision to move forward?
What gets approved at that juncture, Congressman, is a conditional commitment, not the final close of the loan. The loan itself didn't close until September, and so additional due diligence takes place from the conditional commitment through the close of the loan, as is true in every transaction.
What changed then between January 9th, when they needed that information, and January 26th, 10 days later, when they evidently didn't need that information?
I don't know what the January 26th is date that you're...
The January 26th email is right there. It says a DOE staff member states that we are approaching the beginning of the approval process for Solyndra again. The credit committee met and said they didn't do it because they needed this information.
Why do you assume that language says that we're approaching the beginning of an approval process necessarily means anything about the time frame for which under which due diligence took place?
Well, I'm assuming that the credit committee, their observations were taken into account, were they not?
Absolutely, but the beginning, as I read it, as you are now showing it to me, we are approaching the beginning of the approval process. That suggests a pretty open-ended period of time during which due diligence was.
So the credit committee then at that point, it doesn't matter what the credit committee is concerned
No, the credit committee met again in March.
They said we're going to end this.
No, they said that they were going to meet again in March, which they did.
Mr. Chairman, where are all the
Gentleman's time has expired.
Chairman,
Now we are in the first
I have
round.
a unanimous consent request.
Yes,
Can
yes,
we
you
put
are
all of
recognized.
these emails into the record? I'm sitting here, I'm seeing a wee bit of information carefully yellow-lined that's supposed to tell me what has happened here. I don't think there's any lawyer that would tell you that would be sufficient evidence of anything. The whole document should be placed before us so we know.
Well,
if there's wrongdoing here, by golly, let's dig it out. But let's see the whole thing.
Okay.
So far, we're getting a lot of assumptions and understandings and comments from the other side in which they're saying, oh, this is terrible. Look at what has happened here. But I don't know what's happened, and I don't, speak perfectly frank with you, I don't see anything up there which tells me that we have a clear picture of the problems into which we are inquiring. So if we're going to inquire, let's inquire fairly. Let's let everybody see them. Is it possible that my Republican colleagues have seen these papers and the rest of us have not?
We will take the constructive criticism under advisement. We had a unanimous consent in which all the documents will be made available and apart. And I asked my side, the council, to provide the gentleman and your side all these documents, which we have.
They were produced.
And they have been produced, I'm told. So I guess the question is they haven't got to you. Is that a fair assumption?
Well, if the gentleman will yield.
I want them in the record, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, okay. So you have them. You have the same documents we do. You just want to make sure they're part of the record.
If the gentleman will yield.
And we passed the unanimous consent.
I want to know what they said.
Okay.
And I want them in the record.
They'll be put in the record. We had a unanimous consent to do so.
Yeah, and if the gentleman will yield.
Yes.
We were told that the documents were produced under an agreement with the majority that they were to be confidential and were not to be copied or in any way disseminated.
And
we
at the request of O&B, right?
Okay, but
Yeah.
but what happened was in between yesterday when I found this out at about 7 p.m. last night and today, it turned out that number one, the majority released a number of these documents to the press, and number two, the majority apparently took some of these documents, excerpted them in the way that the chairman emeritus is saying, and put them on slides, which we have never been provided. I'm going to tell you, Mr. Chairman, I've been on this subcommittee for 15 years, and I am just as much concerned about this Solyndra loan as everybody else is. But the way that the information has just been parceled out, the witnesses don't have the full copies of the emails in front of them. The minority doesn't have the full copies of the emails in front of them until we ask for them. That is not in the grand tradition of this subcommittee.
We've heard your argument in your opening statement, and we made a unanimous consent they all be part of the document. I'm told that you were given, your staff was given all these documents. OMB is the one that specified that. We have now agreed that we're going to make them all public.
Chairman, they were subpoenaed from OMB.
I know.
OMB doesn't have the right to tell us
I
whether we
understand
can
that.
copy the documents or not.
But we have all agreed that OMB can't tell us, and we're going to make these public. And so I appreciate your concern. We have a unanimous consent from a member who's on the committee but not on the subcommittee, the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Pompeo. Is there any objection to allowing him in the first round? We're going to go for a second round.
Well,
is there any objection to allow him to ask questions?
I have no objection, but I'd like to understand if we're going to get those documents, and if we are going to have a second.
Your point is you have the documents, but you want to make sure the documents are available to.
No, I want to see them.
Okay, well, as I understand from my counsel, we've provided all the documents to you. They were produced to both sides at some times. You have them. Now, is it possible your staff has not made them available to you?
Well, I understand that it is the committee staff to make these available to all members of the committee, and I understand the committee staff works for all of it.
Well, I think that
if I'm in error,
my staff has told me that we have
so.
provided you.
No, Mr. Chairman, what happened was we were told we could look at the documents, but we couldn't copy them, and that under some kind of agreement the majority made with the OMB that the documents could not be disseminated in any way, which is frankly a ridiculous agreement if the majority made that. But in addition, always in the past, in this subcommittee, we've had, if we questioned on documents, we had the full document available for everybody and for the witnesses so that they could review those and give their answers. Instead, what we've had today is these slides which were made taking quotes out of the documents without providing the documents to anybody.
I think, in conclusion, I think the fact that you and Mr. Dingell's point is that these documents should have been made available in a tab so that they could go to the tab.
Mr. Chairman,
I think that's a very
Mr. Chairman,
good point.
if I can ask a question.
Sure.
I think from everything I'm hearing, the emails that are in question are emails from Department of Energy staff. Doesn't Mr. Silver already have access to all of that? That's
He
his
doesn't
agency.
necessarily have access.
Those are people that work under him at his agency who communicated back and forth that we had to subpoena, but I don't think he has to subpoena to get his own internal documents from his
Mr.
agency.
Chairman, we are not complaining about whether Mr. Silver has these emails or not. I am
I think it
complaining that we
was
do not have the emails.
Well, and also,
I find myself affronted that I'm reading about these things in the newspaper and I'm not having them presented to me. That is the most serious way to proceed about a congressional investigation.
We have a little disagreement here, but out of deference to you, I'll take your criticism under advisement. And let's continue on.
May we have a 2-minute
That
restroom
does
break?
not comfort me. When you take it under advisement, that means I might hear about it
I
sometime before the end of the session if I'm lucky.
All right.
I do not view that as being an adequate answer for my concerns. I don't like the precedent which I see being set here. I'm going to read about these things in the press, and I don't like at all the fact that we are having all manners of inferences drawn by the majority, while the minority has not seen the documents. And so I'm not comforted by these matters being taken under advisement.
Well, the gentleman has done this job much more than...
It should be addressed now, not at some future.
Okay.
The gentleman not at some future time.
Has done this job more years than I have ever done or will do. I respect his opinion. We have a little disagreement in the fact is we say we've given you all the documents. The fact that you don't have it in front of you is not necessarily our fault. Because
maybe,
the staff is
maybe I have to raise the question of whose staff we're going to fire. We're going to fire the majority staff or the minority staff?
Well, I think there's a misunderstanding.
If the majority staff is making this kind of a decision, they're going well beyond their powers and well beyond their authorities. If the minority staff is doing it, we're going to thrash this out inside the minority and find out why in hell they're doing it this way.
I suggest you do that, and then you and I talk.
Well, I suggest that we talk now because this is the business of the committee, and I find the business of the committee being conducted in a curious way.
Well, the curious way is that you don't recognize that you have all the documents when my staff has provided all the documents to you, so we're a little puzzled why we're discussing why you don't have all the documents when you do.
The problem is...
Where are the
Mr.
documents then? If I have had them presented to me, I'm anxious to see them.
Okay. Well, I think what we're going to do is continue this discussion, but I want to let the gentleman from Kansas, I recognize him for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the minority for allowing me to participate in the hearing today. Mr. Waxman started this hearing an awful long time ago talking about the fact that the Solyndra folks came in his office in July, told him everything was great, and they filed BK shortly thereafter, and he couldn't understand why. There's a simple reason. Nobody in that room had any skin in the game. This is exactly what we get when the federal government tries to put money into businesses and try to pick winners and losers. And in fact, as I've heard Mr. Zients speak, your task is really to pick just amongst losers. Every one of these has a credit subsidy, right? Is that correct? The Federal Credit Reform Act, you're out there looking at every one of these loans and deciding how much of a loser this guarantee is going to be.
No, I mean, the point is to put a credit allowance.
A score, a cost to the taxpayer.
That's the purpose of the program. Is
Right.
the 1705 program does loans with credit subsidies.
Right. Look, I'm very familiar with FICR. I actually, oddly enough, wrote about this when I was in law school and was published about. So I know a fair amount about the process that you go through there. And you talked about your score having changed. What were the two scores that were given, both in 2009 and then I guess twice in 2011?
Well, the score in 2009, I don't know the exact percent of the score.
Can you get that for me?
It increased.
Can you get me the two scores, what the original scoring was and what the subsequent scoring was?
I'm sorry?
Can you provide to me and to this committee the original score and the subsequent score?
Yeah, we can follow up on that request.
Okay, so you'll provide that information to the committee.
We'll work with staff to make sure that information is
Great,
appropriate.
and then you'll give us also the score in 2011 during the restructuring. You decided this is how much additional subsidy will need to be provided.
Well, in 2011, as part of the restructuring, the determination was that it was a workout based on the fact that the loan was in imminent default and that a workout or a restructuring was in the best interest of taxpayers. That would be reflected the cost of that in the budget.
So it was a negative score. It was good for the taxpayers that this restructuring was taking place.
No.
It's going to cost them less.
The restructuring in the budget, in the annual budget, it will be reflected that the loan, the condition of the loan had deteriorated.
This is exactly what happens when folks without skin in the game get involved in trying to do credit analysis. Let me go back, Mr. Silver. I want to ask you, Mr. Markey spoke about Carnac, that no one could have known what was going to happen to the price of photovoltaic cells, PV cells, that this was just unimaginable that Solyndra's sales price would fall below its cost of production. Do you agree with that? And he said in 2008, who could have known?
Well, I think many analysts and observers have been surprised by the speed and rate of the decline in cell prices, yes.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to place in the record an article. It's from August 4th, 2008. It appeared in Economy. It's written by a man named Mark Modluzewski, the technology commentator. And in August of 2004, he wrote, the cost of PVs, you hear a lot about companies working toward price parity and grid parity. The breakdown, hang on one second, let me get to the right quote. And here's the potentially really bad news for investors. Some big players in the private equity and research side have hypothesized that the price of solar cells is about to plummet so quickly that manufacturers will enter a netherworld where their cost of production exceeds their sales price. So it didn't take Carnac, it just took Mark. Is that correct?
What is the status of my
The gentleman will.
earlier?
Does he have a point of information?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I have a reservation to a unanimous consent request.
Okay.
Made.
The gentleman
And
from
what I'm
Michigan's
doing is-
object, and it will not be put in the record.
I don't object. I just want to know: are the papers that the emails and other things that I have been discussing with the chair going to be put in the record, and are they going to be made available to us?
Yes, they are.
I want to make sure everybody's treated alike.
Absolutely.
If the gentleman wants to put something in, I probably won't object. But I just want to make sure that I'm getting what
With
I
that
need to know.
understanding, do you still object?
I don't object.
All right.
Thank you.
Unanimous consent, so ordered.
Thank you,
Continue.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Dingell. Mr. Silver, was DOE aware of these concerns? I know you weren't there at the time, but you said there's files. Were they aware of the concerns about the pricing of these cells, which were central to Solyndra's ability to repay the government's money?
Well, Solyndra's cylindrical thin film cells were always more expensive than conventional matters, but the issue is total cost of ownership, and you have to combine the cost of the cell with the installation, the balance of systems payments to understand the total cost of ownership. And at that time and in that place, that was a very competitive opportunity.
I understand. You know, you've said you've gone from 35 to 180 folks or so in your organization.
Approximately.
You said that proudly. It troubles me a great deal that the federal government has an agency that's grown by 6x, almost 6 times. I hope you hired Mark as one of those folks that you brought on board going from 30 to 180.
Actually, we have hired an enormously large and talented pool of former private sector public finance experts and executives. So I think we've built a very good team.
Right.
And it was designed simply to exist to put out money.
I appreciate that. You talked about this loss of market share that we've lost this market share because these prices have fallen. Isn't that precisely what these programs are intended to do? To develop products so that the cost of production will come down and solar can compete with all of the other great energies in the world? Shouldn't you be thrilled that the prices come down? Instead, you act as if it's sad because we lost $500 million of taxpayer money.
No, it is. You are completely correct. It is our collective effort to try to find innovative technologies which will in fact do that. We issued, just as an example, we issued a different solar manufacturing loan guarantee just recently to a company whose improvement is a process improvement rather than a product improvement, and allows us to cut the cost of solar paneling manufacturing by 50%.
Right. So the Globe succeeded in reducing the price, but the American taxpayers lost $500 million by us trying to pick a particular business that was going to benefit from that price reduction. Isn't that precisely what happened here?
Well, what is happening is that we are putting together a portfolio of innovative
This was a bad outcome. I've listened. I've been here for the entire hearing today, say for about 2 minutes, and I have heard not a single person stand up and take any accountability for a single dollar of taxpayer money that's gone. We ask who made decisions, we ask who was responsible, and the two of you stand here and point to other people and take no accountability to the taxpayers in America and in Kansas for having lost $500 million of their dollars. That, for me, that is unacceptable. I yield back.
Gentleman's time expired. The witnesses have indicated a personal request, a 5-minute break, so we'll recess our subcommittee and come back at 12:30.
Thank you.
And we appreciate your support. On my side, and just I think at 1 at this side if Mr. Dingell doesn't show up. I'll start with my questions here, and I need someone in council here to take care of the clock so that I keep myself on schedule. Mr. Silver, I was just going back to when I asked you questions in the beginning. In response to my question about Department of Energy conducting due diligence back in 2006, you testified under oath, quote, actually, we're reading exactly what you said. We got the exact transcript. Actually, I didn't say that it was conducted in 2006. I said the application was received in 2006 and due diligence began and continued from late 2007 through 2008, end quote. But this is at odds and opposite with the written testimony that you submitted to the committee where you state, quote, extensive due diligence on the transaction was conducted between 2006 and the end of 2008. Did the, quote, extensive due diligence that you referred to beginning at the end of 2000 as you stated in your verbal testimony, or the 2006 as you submitted in your written testimony? I'm giving you an opportunity to correct it.
Thank you. I don't think those statements are incompatible. The solicitation was issued in 2006, and pre-applications were received at that time. The Loan Program Office received 143, began reviews of those, whittled those down.
Do you stand by your written testimony or your oral testimony?
There is due diligence that takes place in order to ensure eligibility, and then there is further due diligence that takes place in order to
well, you said to me that due diligence was not conducted in 2006, but yet in your written testimony it says it was. So which is which? Just yes or no. Is it your written testimony or your oral testimony this morning?
It's both, Congressman. There are certain kinds
you can't have due diligence in 2006 because in one you said it wasn't and the other you said it was.
The due diligence done in 2006 was to ensure the eligibility of the project, and there was
so there's two different types of due diligence.
Yes, sir.
Is what you're saying.
Exactly.
And what are these two different types?
Well, the
due diligence to me means due diligence. Are you saying due diligence has two different meanings?
I am. Due diligence here, I am exactly saying that. Due diligence here was to decide whether or not an application was in fact eligible, and therefore the due diligence was around technical and financial issues only. Once it was deemed eligible, the company was invited to submit a full application, and full due diligence began. That would include substantially greater kinds of due diligence than what was done to ensure eligibility.
Okay. I certainly give you an opportunity to correct that. Mr. Zients, you testified that OMB did, quote, a thorough examination and analysis. And Mr. Silver, you also testified that DOD DOE conducted months of rigorous and comprehensive due diligence and documentation. I think both of you have indicated that. Is that correct?
I assume this is around the credit subsidy.
Well,
it's hard to react to that
okay.
out of context. If you give me the full context.
Yeah, well, the full context is whether Solyndra itself would be a viable company, and that during this due diligence we're talking about, both of you had performed due diligence in that respect. So,
just to be clear, OMB's statutory responsibility is around FCRA and the credit subsidy.
okay.
And around the credit subsidy score, yes, it was a thorough analysis.
So what I'm alluding to, the fact we had two government agencies doing what they're supposed to do under the law, and both of you testified you did your thorough analysis, examination, rigorous and comprehensive due diligence and documentation. So the question, I think, for me on this committee, and I think for both Democrats and Republicans, this creates some very serious questions about each of your abilities to put aside the administration's what appears to be, and I still stand by this, a political agenda to protect the and you should have protected the taxpayers and made some forceful actions here after this analysis, because you should have seen the problems and you should have said taxpayers need to be protected and this has got to stop. And I think what in the larger sense we're worried about is with this project and others that are stimulus projects, is the comprehensive analysis done by both your agencies sufficient so that taxpayers can feel a good deal of comfort that you'll protect taxpayers in the future and we won't see these out-of-control stimulus projects like Solyndra continue? So that's my basic concern, and I think anybody that watches this hearing will have the same concern that you folks did your due diligence, did the comprehensive, and yet this thing not only went into bankruptcy, but now we have the FBI investigating. And that's what I'd like to move to, Mr. Silver, with you. You said you're a venture capitalist. This company, Solyndra, raised $1.5 billion. As I understand it, roughly $1 billion from venture capitalists, plus the taxpayers at $500 million, plus the hedge funds came in for $75 billion. Is that correct?
Approximately, yes.
Okay, approximately. So let's say $1.5 billion. And they did a burn rate of $1.5 billion in less than 2 years. Is that correct?
Not exactly. A burn rate would be the amount of money they go through per month.
Well, let's say they went through a significant cash burn. Is that a correct statement?
Yes,
okay.
they did have a
Now, with all your experiences on the private sector and in hedge funds that you talked about, don't you think that to look at that kind of cash burn rate would send some alarms to you and to others at the Department of Energy? Something is seriously wrong here, and you've got to protect taxpayers?
I think you have to put this in context, Congressman. The company's revenues actually grew very dramatically during this period. They had $6 million of revenue in 2008. They had $100 million revenue in 2009. But $140 million revenue in 2010. And so that is what you would expect. You would expect a burn rate.
But even the emails we've shown you said that they're going to run out of money by September 2011. So I guess the problem we have is, what was Solyndra burning all this money on? Do you know? Can you tell me today?
Well, in the
this $1.5 billion, where was it all going?
In the most general terms, and I can't give you dollars and cents sitting here today, but they built this brand new huge fabrication facility, which was approximately a $700 and change million facility, equipped with advanced state robotics. They had a smaller prototype plant, if you will, called Fab 1, and they had hired, which was also part of the set of objectives, they had hired hundreds of additional people. There were 3,000 people who were involved in the construction of the plant.
I'll accept what you're saying. I'm just saying, with your experience as a venture capital, I'm surprised you didn't see this cash burn rate as a serious flag.
We did, Congressman, and we talked with the company about it regularly, but I need to underscore something I said before. As lenders, and particularly with lender liability issues, we are not actually in a position to force a company to do anything. So there were regular
Let me just close by this question. Do you have, in your mind's eye, why did the FBI raid Solyndra?
I have no idea, sir.
Was it a surprise to you?
Yes.
Was it a surprise to you?
Yes.
And all your colleagues have no idea why the FBI raided it. And you had no advance warning.
I can't speak for all my colleagues, but I was not aware of any investigation.
Do you suspect there's a reason why?
I wouldn't even hazard a guess, sir.
Okay. My time has expired. The ranking member is recognized. Minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess, Mr. Silver, I would ask you, what were the main reasons DOE concluded Solyndra was worth the government's investment?
In 2008 and 2009, as the due diligence was being done, the price of polysilicon, which is the fundamental component for building out conventional solar panels, was very high and had been high for an extended period. It was expected to remain high. In addition, the cost of installation, as I've indicated, called balance of systems costs, for installing conventional solar paneling is very expensive. That's because the panels themselves are flat. They need to penetrate the roof. There are air uplift issues and the like. The cylindrical thin film technology obviates all of that, and while the cylinders themselves are more expensive than the panels, the total cost of ownership, particularly absent the price of the expensive polysilicon, was very attractive.
So what happened in the market or with technology that caused those two things to not pan out, basically?
Well, a number of different things. First, the price of polysilicon actually came down more dramatically than expected as plants came on quickly to ramp up production. China began flooding the world market with increasingly inexpensive conventional solar panels because, as we've discussed earlier, the Chinese government, through both the China Development Bank and other smaller banks, has provided multiple tens of billions of dollars of credit and credit subsidies, plus other forms of support to their solar manufacturing industry. In addition, other countries have become actively involved in supporting those areas as well. So all of that drove the price curve down in a very significant fashion.
And here's my question. Why didn't DOE predict those events?
I think we did understand that there were challenges in the marketplace. The fundamental responsibility and objective of this program is to identify innovative technologies that can be built out at scale and therefore leapfrog the traditional price curves that these technologies are on. But if the slope of the curve is more dramatic than anticipated, you will have this kind of event.
So you did predict it in a way, but you didn't think it would be
well, we have
dramatic?
As you know, we have a large number of solar experts and solar industry experts at the department. In addition, on this particular project, a number of different analysts and independent advisors were brought on board to analyze this as well.
Do you think there are things DOE could have done to prevent this whole debacle with the Solyndra loan? Was there more due diligence that could have been done? Was it rushed too fast to approval? What could have been done?
It clearly wasn't rushed too fast because there were several years of due diligence that went on. There are always going to be changes and shifts in market dynamics. I remind the committee that the loan, which was to build out the plant, actually built out the plant on time and on budget. And at the same time, revenues were dramatically increasing. There was a significant, there was a significant customer base as well. But I guess the fundamental challenge is to ensure that we are doing everything we can to de-risk these projects, and that's why we build in that the terms and conditions of these things are dozens and dozens and dozens of pages long to do everything we can to de-risk these projects.
So you don't think there's anything else that could have been done here? Is that your bottom line?
By the time of the restructuring, the plant was built but had not been fitted out, and so one might conceivably, have identified a different plant configuration. But again, I hesitate to second guess because it is the private sector that brought this project forward. I want to remind the committee.
So let me. I don't have much time left, Mr. Zients. What's your opinion? Is there anything we could have done to predict this or to stop it?
Well, I think it is the nature of backing innovative technologies, that there are technology risks in some situations, market risks. We're competing in a global market. So I think the lesson learned here is that marketplaces can change even more rapidly than one would have anticipated in terms of the cost curve that we talked about before. I don't think anyone would have thought that the cost could decrease or the price could decrease so dramatically. Going forward, we need to make sure that we understand those types of market shifts can occur.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I just want to reiterate my request for unanimous consent that the documents that have been referred to in the hearing today by the members be included in the record. And in addition, there's a document that I have which I think would help complete the record. It's the Credit Committee paper, Request for Loan Guarantee Approval, dated March 11, 2009. And I think that would help answer some of the follow-up questions about what happened after this January 9th meeting. My only one concern is at the top of this document, it does say restricted distribution, privileged business information, and as I flip through it, it does look like there might be business information. So the caveat I would have is to look and see if there is privileged business information in here before we make the whole thing.
Okay. By unanimous consent, so ordered. And also, we want to put our supplemental report by unanimous consent
Thank
also. With that, we'll move to Mr. Griffith. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Silver, we talked earlier about other companies in similar circumstances, and I'm not sure that I asked the question on observers. I asked the question on others that had been subordinated, where the government money had been, the taxpayers' money had been subordinated. Are there observers on any other boards as a part of this loan guarantee program?
No, sir, nor would there typically be.
And in regard to the observer, I'm concerned, you indicated to me that they told you that bankruptcy was most likely by the end of July. Is that not what you told me earlier?
That the company was facing imminent troubles. I don't know that I would describe it as bankruptcy because, of course,
because I asked bankruptcy before and you said the end of July.
Well, that they were clearly having financial troubles again, and we're going to need to figure out what to do, or would face a bankruptcy.
All right, because that raises a real concern for me that I think every member of this committee is concerned about. Apparently, they, not you all, Solyndra was here on Capitol Hill speaking to members of Congress, indicating everything was on track at the same time that your observer was telling us, or was telling you all that there was a problem. Again, I'm not saying that you all knew they were up here telling fibs, but I am concerned that they were up here telling fibs. That being said, what was your observer's role? Because clearly they were in trouble, and what recommendations did he make to you all, and did you all send word through him to the board on what they should do to protect the taxpayer dollars?
Well, first, Congressman, in this particular case, the observer is a woman. But
thank you.
What she did, and she is also the head of our portfolio management group and a career civil servant who ran that express function at the Export-Import Bank for many, many years. She's a highly.
She's a great lady.
Great lady.
I'm not going to dispute that. I don't know anything better. What did she say we should do? Did she give you all advice on what should be done? Did she take messages back to the board saying we want to protect the taxpayer dollars? I mean,
absolutely.
They laid off all the employees. Why couldn't they have laid off half? Those kinds of questions. Was that going on?
Yes, on a regular basis.
And can you provide us some kind of written documentation as to what was going on and what steps were being taken to try to protect the taxpayers' dollars once you learned that even after the restructuring, this company was going to fail or was likely to fail?
I don't know if there are any documents specifically related to that, but I do know that we've now turned over, as I said, close to 30.
I understand. I'm asking you if you can.
I don't think there are any other documents. I mean, I think we've.
I'm asking you to create a document. Can somebody give us something in writing as to what was being done from July until the announcement that they were going bankrupt to try to protect taxpayers' dollars?
We can certainly work with you on that, yes.
All right. Thank you. And of all the problems that you cite regarding to Solyndra, with maybe the exception of the cost of the polysilicon, I apologize if I got that wrong, dealing with competition from China and the economic instability in Europe and so forth, where they buy more of these things. On the other loans that you have, are those pressures not also present?
Well, as I said, the vast majority of our portfolio
production. I am talking about the four manufacturing.
They are, to a certain degree, the project that I made reference to earlier actually is a process project rather than a product. So it produces a standard conventional panel, but it does it in a much more cost-effective way with about half the use of materials and about half the time. So it is it's a bit of a different configuration.
And how much money do we have that we have guaranteed a loan for that company?
I think I'll have to check the exact number, but it's about $135 million.
Okay, so we gave 535 to the company that's riskier and 135 to the one that isn't. And are they doing well?
So far, again, these projects are only now just beginning construction, most of them.
Will you tell us if these companies start to have problems so that we can anticipate this and try to figure out what we need to do as the folks who are ultimately responsible for the spending of the taxpayers' money?
Happy to work with you on that, sir.
All right. And then, you know, we act like sometimes, and I know there's no perfect world and maybe one guy or one gal got it right, but we act like, you know, we didn't see this coming, and yet, you know, there is indications that somebody on your team, and I know you weren't there at the time the loan was made, but somebody on your team had it figured out. And I'm just wondering, what steps have you taken, knowing that somebody on your team raised a concern that the models wouldn't work? What steps are you taking to make sure that, even if it's a minority viewpoint, when it comes to spending $500 million of the taxpayers' money, that maybe y'all pay attention to every warning sign?
Well, as a matter of practice, with every transaction we do, we run a series of sensitivity analyses which change variables in the assumptions, and therefore...
Is that different now than it was in August of 2009 when somebody raised the warning flag and nobody seemed to pay attention?
I don't know for sure, but I doubt it. I doubt that it was different. I mean,
so you think it's the same model?
It's standard practice to run sensitivity analyses.
And now that we've had this hearing, are you going to go back and take a look at it and see if you can come up with a better tuned or finer tuned model?
We'll continue to work with OMB to improve the models, yes.
All right. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yield back his time, and the gentleman emeritus of the Energy and Commerce Committee is recognized for 5 minutes, Mr. Dingell of Michigan.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your courtesy. I got a few little questions here to ask. I've been looking sort of at how these events occurred. And perhaps, Mr. Silver, you can help me with this. On January 9, Solyndra transaction was reviewed by a DOE credit committee and remanded for further analysis, right?
Yes, sir.
It was not rejected.
I'm sorry?
It was not rejected. It just was remanded.
It was not formally rejected. It was remanded back.
Then, on the 15th of January, loan program staff notified DOE Credit Review Board that it developed a schedule to complete Solyndra due diligence that would bring the project to approval in early March 2009, and final closing by early to mid-April 2009. Is that right?
I think that was the original projection.
Okay. Then Obama came into office on January 20, 2009, 5 days later. So then, if I look here, I see on February, March 2009, DOE continues to negotiate terms and conditions with Solyndra. Is that right?
I believe so, yes, sir.
Okay. And then on March 12, DOE Credit Committee considers and approves Solyndra transaction. Is that right?
Yes, a recommendation for...
Who was on that credit committee?
I'd have to get you the specific names, but it's the same group of career. It's the same group of career professionals that were on the first committee.
Career, no political appointees.
No political appointees, no, sir.
So then, on the 20th of March, DOE issued a conditional commitment to Solyndra. Is that right?
That is correct.
Now, what were the conditions in that conditional commitment?
Well, there were a number of them. Conditions precedent are simply things the company, the applicant, needs to do in order to complete its responsibilities before we can close.
And what you say is if you do those things, we'll...
Right. Among them, for example, was the raise of an additional several $100 million of capital, which they did. And during the time they were doing their CP work, we were continuing to do additional due diligence. It's important to remember that due diligence continues post-conditional commitment all the way to final close.
Okay. Now, then on the 27th of April, independent market consultant report was submitted. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Now, what did that report contain?
Well, an independent market report generally describes the market for the product, examines the competitive landscape, looks at relative cost attributes, and the kind of classic documentation you describe around that.
Okay. Now, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle appear to be of the view that at some point the Department of Energy denied the loan to Solyndra on January 9th of 2009. Now, isn't it true that at that time the Department's Credit Review Board simply asked for further information and did not reject the request?
The Credit Committee, sir, not the Credit Review Board, but yes, the Credit Committee.
Okay. And then in your comments, you have indicated shortly after the request for more information, the Loan Program Office outlined a timeline to complete the due diligence on the Solyndra request. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
When did that occur? What date or approximately what time?
I don't know the exact date, but they came back rather quickly and said we will be in a position to bring this back sometime in the March timeframe.
Okay, now when was that timeline developed? Before or after President Obama came into office?
Before the Obama administration took office.
It was. Okay. So what I'm seeing here then, this was followed up by the bankruptcy of Solyndra. When was that bankruptcy filed?
I don't know the specific date, but sometime in early September.
All right. Now,
the gentleman is September 6th of this year as bankruptcy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would note that the bankruptcy, though, is not complete. It's going to throw Solyndra into reorganization. Is that right?
I believe so.
So the end result of that will be that the United States will be a creditor, right?
I'm sorry, will be what?
The United States will be a creditor. A creditor.
A creditor, yes, I'm sorry.
And now the practical result of that is that, first of all, we have done things to get ourselves into a position where we see that Solyndra had a chance, at least during this, to provide jobs, put forward a new technology in the United States. Is that right?
Yes, sir. The analysis that produced the going concern valuation suggested that it was a 2 to 4x greater recovery likely to the taxpayer than a liquidation analysis.
Okay. And during that time, the buildings and so forth were completed?
Yes.
Is that right? And I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your courtesy here, but I got just a couple more small questions. I would note that the government's chance of recovery from that reorganization are better both in amount and certainty than if we had seen Solyndra go into bankruptcy earlier. Is that right?
We expect so. We'll have to see what happens actually in the bankruptcy process, but we have a completed and operating plant, fully fitted out, inventory, and all kinds of things that did not exist during the first restructuring.
Very good. Mr. Chairman, you are very kind. Thank you for your courtesy.
Gentleman's time has expired, and we recognize the gentleman from Texas, Dr. Burgess, for 5 minutes.
Did we get what we wanted?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I appreciate your perseverance and endurance in the hearing today. This morning's Washington Post references an email exchange between an assistant to Rahm Emanuel, then the White House Chief of Staff, August 31 of 2009, to Office of Management of the Budget about the upcoming announcement where we talked about this before. This was the groundbreaking where Secretary Chu was going to be at the company on September 4th, and Vice President Biden was going to appear by satellite. And this staffer was concerned about the upcoming Biden announcement on Solyndra and asked whether there's anything we can do to help speed along the OMB side. And an OMB staffer responded, I would prefer this announcement be postponed. This is the first loan guarantee that we should have full review with all hands on deck and make sure we get it right. I mean, that seems pretty reasonable from OMB. Now, when committee staff was briefed, or when OMB staff briefed committee staff last spring, well, there was, as you know, there was quite a lot of difficulty in getting any of these documents to the committee staff from OMB. It took 4 months to get any emails or communications about the role in reviewing Solyndra's loan guarantee. And in fact, this committee last month, or in July, had a business meeting to subpoena those documents because we were having no success in acquiring those. And now we have them, and we see that the White House scheduled announcement date before the OMB even began reviewing the deal in August 2009. We also see that OMB was aware that the groundbreaking event, and it felt time pressures to do their work, possibly resulting in the use of a wrong financial model. Is this why committee had to subpoena the documents? Was there something here that you didn't want us to see?
No, can I see the emails that you're referring to?
Well, actually, it's a Washington Post article from this morning, but I'm sure we have the same emails in the document binder that can be provided.
Chairman, give them the emails.
Gentlemen's continue. Gentleman has the time.
While they're looking for the emails, and we'll come back to that, let me just ask if, for both of you, would you be able to provide to this committee, not today, but get back to us and provide the names to the committee of every career and political appointee at both Department of Energy and Office of Management of the Budget and the West Wing who worked on the project or inquired about the project, and provide access to committee staff to any of those individuals that the committee believes is necessary to question for this investigation?
OMB has been cooperating with the committee.
Sir, we subpoenaed the documents in July. You can't characterize that as cooperation.
A few days before the subpoena, which we thought was unnecessary, we turned over over 1,000
so we had
pages.
this hearing, and your chair was empty in July. Your chair was empty. There was no one there. No one responded.
Well, as to that, I was given less than 4 days' notice. I had a personal reason why I could not be here. I expressed to Chairman Stearns directly on the telephone that I was willing to come if there could be an alternative time.
Well,
the decision was made there was no alternative time. But I want to be clear that I was willing to come to the committee as long as I had either sufficient notice.
Time. I mean, this has been going on for a long time.
So,
and here's the thing that's driving us, that's really concerning a lot of us. Had you responded to the committee staff, had you responded to the committee's request, could we perhaps have preserved some of those taxpayer dollars that have now been lost in a bankruptcy proceeding and subordinated to venture capital firms? Had there been cooperation from your office, would this loss to the taxpayer have been as great?
Prior to the subpoena, which I believe was mid-July, OMB worked with committee staff, turned over 1,000 pages of documents, did numerous meetings. Since mid-July, OMB has turned over 9,000 pages of documents. There have been 7
Sir, I got to interrupt you because I'm going to run out of time. That letter was in March, and it took a long time to get anything back. I have a couple of things, and you've got now the emails. I'm going to ask you to take those, and we'll get you the question in writing, and I would appreciate a response to that question.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Well, I'm going to submit the question to you in writing and regarding those emails, so we're all clear about what we're asking and what we're answering. And then I also have a memo from October 25th of 2010 to the President from Carol Brown and Ron Klain and Larry Summers, and I have a series of questions that I want to ask you about this memo as well, and because of time constraints, obviously I can't get to them. We'll provide you this memo, we'll provide you the questions, and I would appreciate a timely response to those interrogatories. Thank you. Now yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Scalise is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask Mr. Zients, is that proper way to say
Got it.
name? Want to get that right?
Thank you.
Sure. You were at OMB throughout this whole process with Solyndra from when they got the original loan?
No.
When did you come into OMB?
Well, I came into OMB. I was confirmed by the Senate in late June of 2009. So the conditional commitment period, the early in the administration period, I was not at OMB.
And when was the loan to Solyndra finalized?
In September. So I was there.
So you were there at OMB.
I was at OMB at the time. I was not.
At the time that Solyndra first got the loan, first was approved for,
yes,
got the loan.
When it closed.
Following up on some of the questions that Dr. Burgess had.
Just to clarify that I was not personally involved in.
These are the questions that I'm going to ask you about, because there is involvement between OMB and the Department of Energy and the White House. And what we've been trying to establish is just exactly what was that relationship between OMB, the Department of Energy, and the White House relating the Solyndra loan. And of course, we did start asking for this information months ago prior to the restructuring. And your office was not complying in getting us some of the information we were requesting, to the point we did have to subpoena. And there is a timeline issue that a lot of us have concerns with, too, because if we were able to stop the restructuring from happening, for example, then the taxpayers would not have been pushed in the back of the line to where now they are subordinated in bankruptcy.
Just so we have our timelines correct, I believe that the restructuring was completed in February.
And our staff started asking for some of this documentation prior to that time.
Is that's not my understanding.
That's a timeline I have. But regardless of that, I want to get to some of these specific emails because these emails span throughout the entire length of the Solyndra loan and restructuring, and it seems to indicate a pattern. Going back in slide 7, if we can put that up, and that way you can see it. And by the way, these emails were all provided to the minority as soon as we got them. So everybody had access to these emails on this committee and subcommittee.
Does the witness have these emails that Mr. Skillies is
I would
referring
imagine,
to?
well, I think they just gave him these
Thank you.
emails. Some of these
I don't
came
think
from
that-
his own agency, of course. Some of these are
But if
OMB.
we're going
This
to be
one,
talking about specific emails, I agree with the Congresswoman.
well, and I want to ask you a question about this email. I think it does show, though, what I want to do is show that there was a pattern of expediency, of rushing
The witness
process.
have this email?
Well, the gentlelady, point of order is what's your point of order?
But I do. If I'm going to respond to an email, I need to make sure I have it.
Mr.
Zients,
Chairman, is the
you
clock
have-
still running? If we can just get the clock to stop while
Well,
we
gave you about 2 minutes before you even started the clock, so you're well into it. But now the witness has the emails. Is that correct?
I'm going to need to absorb.
All right, well,
what he's just handed me is not what is on the screen. I can look through and see if
Page 7, I'll read the quote. In congressional testimony, and by the way, this is congressional testimony. This isn't some email that we just got. This was testimony going back to March of 2009. A senior Department of Energy official said that Secretary Chu, quote, has directed us to accelerate the process significantly, talking about the loan process. Now I'll go to some OMB emails. Of course, on page 9, on slide 9.
the email I have in front of me, to the best of my knowledge, and again, I wasn't actually in seat on March 17th, 2009, but to the best of my knowledge, doesn't have any OMB people on it. So it's very difficult.
Right, but there's a March of 2009 email on slide 9. Quote, this deal is not ready for prime time. Go to the next slide. Given the time pressure we are under to sign off on Solyndra, we don't have time to change the model. That's an OMB staff email from August of 2009 after you came on board. Another quote from that same email, quote, but we also need to make sure they don't jam us on later deals, so there isn't time to negotiate those too. Next page, some more OMB emails, and I'll ask a question. I want to get all of these into the record. Again, they're available to both committee staffs. Quote, there is anything we can help speed along on the OMB side.
We need to, as we go case by case, I need to understand what email you're referring to. I need to have that email in front of me.
Sure. There is a communication on slide 11, for example. August 31st, 2009, the special assistant noted the vice president's announcement at Solyndra on September 4th and whether, quote, there's anything we can help speed along on OMB side. So were you involved, and forget about the emails, were you involved in any communications with the White House to push the Department of Energy to speed this thing along?
No.
You were not?
No.
Were you aware that anyone else at OMB was involved?
I am now aware in my preparation for the hearing that there was a request from the Vice President's office about scheduling logistics for a potential event. This again, has nothing to do with the decision to give the loan or not give the loan to the company. This process has to do with OMB's statutory responsibility to determine the right credit subsidy. The credit subsidy was actually increased during.
Well, then, I don't know if that was credit subsidies. I'll go to slide 12 because this is specifically an OMB email, and I'll read it and you can look at it. This is an OMB email that specifically talks about the approval. Quote, we have ended up with a situation of having to do rushed approvals on a couple of occasions, and we are worried about Solyndra at the end of the week. We would prefer to have sufficient time to do our due diligence reviews and have the approval set the date for the announcement rather than the other way around. This was a communication between OMB and Terrell McSweeney at the Office of the Vice President.
This does have to do with the credit subsidy score. This does not have to do with the yes, no on the loan. This has to do with the credit subsidy score. As I mentioned before, the credit subsidy score was actually increased.
Right. And so the question, and I'm almost out of time,
if I can just say
there is clear communication between OMB and the White House and Department of Energy regarding all this, whether it was just about a ribbon cutting, but I think it shows that crony capitalism is running amok relating this program. And I think this is a classic example. And there was a PricewaterhouseCoopers study that was done back in 2010. USA Today writes about it in an article, in an editorial today, where they talk about PricewaterhouseCoopers saying there's substantial doubt about its ability to continue going as a concern, Solyndra. And so this was over a year ago. They reported a serious concern about Solyndra going forward. And obviously there was pushback from the administration somewhere to push this thing along, run it through.
The chronology of events is not consistent. You're asking about a period of time in August, September of 2009. You're now referencing.
I'm going throughout the whole process. I'm not just focusing on one area. Because there was a loan, there was a restructuring. There's continued to be advancements of money, and yet there were warning signs at every level, and yet it seems like crony capitalism was trumping the smart decision-making process and due diligence that should have been going on, and a lot of these emails show that out to be the case, and yet $535 million of taxpayer money are now at risk. And so I hope you can understand, and maybe you weren't directly involved, but somebody at your agency was in that chain.
Expired.
I yield back.
The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffin, is recognized for 5 minutes. Oh, Mr. Markey. Mr. Markey, do you wish to ask questions in the second round? Yes, I mean, you're up if you want to go right now. May I reserve at this time? Okay, you can reserve. Yeah, Mr. Griffin from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I already had a second round. I'm glad to take a third round.
Okay. Then we can go to the gentleman who's not on the subcommittee, but he's on the full committee. The gentleman from Kansas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zients, following up on Representative Scalise's, were you not aware that the staff was being jammed, that they were being rushed? Were you at any time aware that they were being hurried and that they felt hurried, or were you oblivious to that?
What period of time are we talking about?
At any. How about that? We'll start at any period of time.
So I was not involved, so I would not have been aware at the time. In my preparation for this hearing, I talked to OMB staff. And again, what we're talking about here is the credit subsidy.
I understand.
And on the credit subsidy, the OMB staff has presented to me that they had no hesitation as to the final decision. And the final decision of the credit subsidy actually increased the credit subsidy, which made it more conservative.
Right. They could still have been wrong because they were hurried. You think these emails they were just wrong? They were making this stuff up. They weren't hurried when they. At
the end of the day, the OMB career staff, which has deep expertise in credit scoring, felt comfortable with the credit subsidy.
That expertise is very apparent in $500 million being lost by the American taxpayer. It's readily apparent to us. Mr. Zients, there's a January 4th memorandum. I want to just read to you. It's an OMB memorandum prepared by the OMB staff. It says, even under DOE's proposed restructuring, we're skeptical about the long-term viability of the company. Bankruptcy or default are real possibilities, and Solyndra's product is priced at a premium in the market with rapidly declining prices, and the company's cost structure does not cover operating margins. It is not clear that Solyndra would be able to achieve the scale and efficiency improvements necessary to improve margins. This was during the restructuring time. Why did OMB not stop the restructuring from going forward or recommend that?
OMB pressure tested DOE's analysis. OMB determined that the company was in imminent default, and then OMB determined that DOE's recommendation that the company be restructured was preferable to liquidation, that was a reasonable outcome that DOE had reached.
Let me, would you please provide the witness? There's a series of emails in and around that same time, January 4th, 2011, one of them at 2:08 p.m. Can you just make sure he's got a copy of that? Thank you. I'll summarize, but this is an email chain where it is very clear that the data are suggesting to staff at this moment in time that liquidation will cost the taxpayers a lower loss than will restructuring. Do you see? It says liquidation. It's underlined. It's got some analysis for expected recovery. And then it shows restructured, expected loss. The difference is under bankruptcy at the time, they expected losses estimated by this person on your staff to be $141 million. And it says if we do the restructuring, your staff says it will be about $385 million loss. Do you see what I'm referring to there?
Yeah, I'm not on this email chain. But
No, sir, you're not, but they work for you.
I'm sorry?
You're not on the chain, but they work for you.
Right. So, our staff is obviously pressure testing and understanding an evolving situation. The restructuring was actually done in February based off of DOE's recommendation. OMB decided that that was reasonable. At this point in time, there was information that the staff was looking at. The information obviously evolved across that period of time as OMB got more information. As DOE made its final recommendation, OMB determined that DOE's recommendation was reasonable to restructure the loan.
Can you show me that evolution? Because there's no evidence in the documents I've reviewed of any evolution. This is what your agency thought on January 4th of 2011, and I have seen no data that suggests there was an evolution other than your testimony here this morning.
Well, first of all, this is an email from one analyst.
Multiple emails. Read the whole.
I would not represent that as to what the agency's view was.
Read the whole chain, sir. These folks think this is a horrible idea to go forward with this restructuring. They think the taxpayers will lose. Indeed, these are the only government officials in the entire process that seem to me have demonstrated have concern for taxpayer finances.
OMB's role here is to make sure that this is budgeted for correctly. Ultimately, DOE is ultimately responsible for the decision as to whether or not to restructure or liquidate. OMB determined that that was a reasonable conclusion.
Do you think it was a reasonable conclusion today, sitting here today? Do you think it was a reasonable conclusion?
It's unclear.
What's your opinion, sir? Do you think it was a reasonable conclusion?
To restructure the loan when it does? I think that there is reason to believe that was reasonable at that point in time.
Reason to believe it was reasonable when you're not a lawyer. I mean, an answer like that.
It was a reasonable conclusion at that point in time.
Mr. Silver, do you think it was a reasonable conclusion to do the restructuring at this time?
Yes, I do, Congressman. We did a detailed liquidation analysis which suggested that the returns would be 2 to 4x below what they would be as a going concern. To do that, we evaluated the price of the buildings and the land. We also evaluated the value of inventory on a going concern basis. What you do on a going concern basis, just to be clear, is you match it with what are called EBITDA forward market.
I'm very familiar with that.
So you use, and since you are, you will know that we scoured the market for comparables. We took the low end of the comparables, and then we measured that against the liquidation.
So you were just wrong. Or you still believe you might be right because we're not.
Well, you don't know what will happen in an outcome.
Right. So what do you think? You think we're gonna good deal?
I think that when you are called on to make a judgment at the time with the best available information you have, you go with the probabilistic return.
Right. And so you think it was realistic to subordinate the taxpayer at that time as well as part of that restructuring?
Every piece of data that we had from independent analysts about the technology at that time, which we re-underwrote the technology and the market space. We had another market report done. All seem to suggest that that could happen.
I appreciate it. I just want to ask one more question. My time is out. Do you both, sitting here today, I've listened to you for several hours now, just yes or no, do you both just treat this as just the normal cost of doing business? Is that how you think this failure at Solyndra, you just think this was the normal cost of doing business? You talk about portfolio theory, this stuff happens, bad things happen. Would you both just say yes or no? This is just the way things go. Yes or no?
I think that while it's very regrettable, the loss was anticipated when Congress set out the appropriated credit.
So you think it's very normal, Mr. Zients?
It's not normal. It's a very disappointing outcome, but it comes with the terrain of backing innovative technologies.
Yep, it's part of what happens when the government gets involved in things like this. I agree.
Well, it is also what is required in order to compete successfully with what's happening around the world, particularly in China.
Solyndra certainly wasn't capable of competing, even in spite of all this government assistance, were they?
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think we're ready to close, to end the committee unless the gentleman from Massachusetts wishes to participate in the second round.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bilbray, too. So, Mr. Bilbray, you'll be after the gentleman from Massachusetts. We've recognized Mr. Markey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to compliment my Republican colleagues on their discipline. But after weighing these relentless and very serious allegations of law-breaking and inappropriate politicization of the loan guarantee process, I am unconvinced. 3 years of due diligence was exercised in considering this application. OMB completed their review process, albeit in an expedited manner due to the nature of a Recovery Act that needed to get money out the door as quickly as possible. I would add that the chairman of the subcommittee and the full committee expressed the need to get Recovery Act money out the door quickly after that law was passed. Mr. Silva, do you believe that the department cut corners in considering this loan guarantee in the months and years leading up to its finalization in September of 2009?
Again, as with a review of the record, I wasn't there, but with a review of the record, no, I don't believe so.
Mr. Zients, was OMB able to do and exercise their oversight role to complete a comprehensive review of the Department of Energy's loan package to Solyndra?
Yes, my belief is yes.
When you pull thousands of pages of emails, can you tell whatever story you'd like when you look back retrospectively? You know, we live life forwards, but we understand it backwards. Is it possible to go back and create any storyline?
I believe that can happen, yes, sir.
The majority has chosen to politicize this program, and it is attempting to discredit clean energy the same way they have tried to do to climate science. It is that simple. That simple. What this really reminds me of, to be honest with you, is the late 1990s, after this committee had passed the Telecommunications Act of 1990, and there was a boom on broadband. And many companies failed. Pets.com, the list is long. On the other hand, there were companies that, in the new environment that we had created, were successful. eBay, Amazon, Google, YouTube, the list goes on. There were many successes, many failures, because we created a paranoia-inducing Darwinian marketplace. What's different here, of course, and what no one anticipated in 2009, although we were in a competition with the Chinese, and by the way, when we passed the Telecommunications Act, we were trying to make sure we branded it made in the USA, which we did. That's how people view that internet revolution in Egypt and Tunisia and countries around the world. But here, the Chinese have now decided to dump $20 billion into 4 companies. Can you talk about that, Mr. Silva? Can you talk about this environment now within which American solar companies, wind companies, are now competing against a state-run set of corporations against our private sector companies?
Yes, Congressman, I'd be happy to. Not only, as you point out, has China underwritten its solar manufacturing industry with tens and tens of billions of dollars, they have, as I indicated earlier, produced and provided a wide array of additional support facilities, including free land and other kinds of things. There are also mechanisms in place for the purchase of those panels in the domestic market that don't exist here. But I don't think we should limit our focus to China alone. Countries around the world understand the importance and the viability of this space. And it's important that we take this as a global challenge. There will only be one opportunity for us to become a winner here. And if we miss that window, we will have missed a multi-trillion-dollar market.
Okay. I thank you. I think if we keep China here as the headline and we understand what we were trying to do and putting together a plan, we had a plan for telecom. China and the United States are pretty much starting at the same point in solar and wind, and we were trying to put together a plan. Batteries as well. Let me also say this. You can look back, and I can right now say there's an NRC senior scientist who has a memo to all the NRC commissioners saying that the AP1000, which is the reactor the Southern Company wants to build, will crack like a glass cup if there's an earthquake. No, you can keep that memo, and you can say that's the reason we should give no loan guarantees to the Southern Company or other companies. Or you can just say we weighed it in the totality of all the evidence. I'm hearing our Republican colleagues expressing a great deal of angst about whether or not a $535 million loan guarantee should have been given to Solyndra when there is no evidence that they have expressed any concerns about far larger guarantees that have been given to the Southern Company, to other companies that could in fact wind up with billions of dollars ultimately being put on the shoulders of the taxpayers in our country. And I'm talking specifically about the nuclear sector. There's a fundamental crisis happening in Japan, in Germany, and other countries. We're part of a global story, and it's impacting the domestic nuclear industry. Those loan guarantees could come back to haunt the taxpayers in our country, and I hope that we see a similar interest in that subject, because that's happening right now, and now is the time for this committee to exercise the due diligence to protect the taxpayer. Thank you, Mr.
The gentleman's time has expired, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Bilbay, is recognized.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Let me join with my colleague from Massachusetts and call for a hearing on the nuclear issue, because I think, the gentleman from Massachusetts has to remember that, like just last week in San Diego, the plants shut down exactly as planned during a blackout, exactly as posed. You get the facts from Japan, and as somebody who has a nuclear facility in his county, I am more confident now of the safety of our technology than I was beforehand, and remind the gentleman from Massachusetts that the beautiful bay of San Diego Bay is full of nuclear reactors being run by 20-something-year-old kids, and it's safer and cleaner because we have those reactors in San Diego Bay. But getting back to the issue here is that the technology was not keeping up with the hype. And as somebody that still feels strongly about the opportunity of clean technology, I think the inappropriate application of political influence or perception, and I don't think this was an intentional misdeed. I think it is a much deeper problem that this was a prejudice for a broad definition of technology, as if somehow this was going to be the answer for everything. First of all, let me clarify. The gentleman from California pointed out that China, and the gentleman from Massachusetts, that China has been aggressive on this. Well, mind you that this plant was sited where the electricity was 22 cents a kilowatt, twice of what it is in Ohio, and where China is producing them in an area where they're 6 cents a kilowatt is what they're charging. So all of this, Mr. Silva, all of this does relate to the productivity and the ability to compete in a world market, doesn't it?
Yes, certainly siting issues are relevant.
And shouldn't these things be considered along with the specific technology that is being proposed to provide a certain product? Or asking for the grant?
Once again, Congressman, we don't provide grants, but I think what you mean is
the loan guarantee.
The technologies that we underwrite are those that are spelled out in the legislation. We don't search out those that aren't.
Okay, I have a question for you specifically. This is part of a stimulus bill. San Diego, we're citing a French facility to build solar panels, specifically because we have a stationary source. First thing we do is not try to build a new facility. California, as everyone knows, has had businesses fleeing. We have huge open warehouses. And the logic our mayor's making, and we're making working with him, is why don't we go ahead and retrofit existing structures rather than building one? The fact that this was proposing to take virgin land, farmland, and go from the ground up and build all the construction of a whole new building with all the related so-called stimulus of building a virgin building or building on virgin land and a ground up, did that have any influence in the fact that this was included in the stimulus bill, not just the green part of it, of the hope that all solar was going to be good, but the fact that you had a whole new factory being built in California, probably one of the only one even being considered. Do you think that had any influence in the approval of this process, that the fact that they were capitalizing a whole new facility rather than retrofitting an existing one?
I don't know how to answer that. The applications that we receive come in from the sponsors themselves. So the proposal, the project has already been put together by private sector actors, including the investors in whatever project it is.
But that's in their prospectus.
No, that they're actually filing an application for a specific for funding for a specific project.
But the technical review had that in consideration.
Well, the technical review...
That was part of the documentation they gave the technical review board.
The technical review is intended to ensure that the technology works, which clearly it did. They sold hundreds of millions of dollars worth of product, and to ensure that the plant will be built in such a way as to produce them appropriately.
Okay. So in other words, do you or do you not feel that the fact that they had a major capital improvement proposed in this package helped sell it as part of the stimulus package?
I don't know the answer to that. We don't evaluate projects on the basis of their impact for non-project specific activities. We manage them against the criteria and objectives of the program.
Okay, I'm going to ask you again because you've had time to talk to your staff about it. Are you aware, or has anybody made you aware of your agency actually intervening about the siting of where production sites should be placed as a condition of getting the loan guarantee?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Okay, I would ask you to specifically ask that question, investigate that question.
Happy to do so.
Because I have good information that specifically has been made a condition of some grants, at least one, that the production line needs to be built in a certain area and not in another area, and that is something that has been documented to me very strongly, and I think it's real critical. My biggest problem here again is that the perception that solar is good means all solar proposals are good, and why don't we move it?
Congressman, if I may, we've received literally hundreds and hundreds of applications, dozens and dozens of
let me just say
solar.
This was a $500 million mistake, and I would ask that we point out that there was a action taken by your body under a justification of a legal definition, that I think it's a threat to both Democrats and Republicans, that the word is, and that for somebody to sit there and ignore the law and redefine the word is, I think the American people are outraged that a $500 million issue was raised while a legal jargon was ignoring the fact that the law is in there. And I don't think Democrat or Republican wants to have to add to every law that it will never happen. I yield back, gentlemen.
Gentleman's time has expired. I think we finished, and we've had a very good discussion. I want to thank the witnesses. Will the ranking gentlelady, does she have any concluding comments before I wrap up?
I want to thank the witnesses for coming today. I think we had a very spirited and interesting discussion about both the specifics of this deal and also the future of federal government's role in solar energy. I'm very much looking forward to the testimony of the executives of Solyndra next week, and I would hope, Mr. Chairman, that we can have a more orderly way of presenting documents.
Would the gentlelady yield?
I'll yield, certainly.
Well, we're just trying to conclude this.
Gentlelady, I would like to urge that we have a hearing on the risk premium which DOE and OMB are charging to the nuclear industry for loan guarantees post-Fukushima and post the Wall Street reassessment. This is happening right now. We should get ahead of this issue and hold these hearings.
We take that under advisement. Let me conclude by just saying to both of you that I think you should, based upon what I hear today, go back and look at all solar panel projects of stimulus package. I think when you realize that the solar industry is truly dependent on subsidies, and the government pays about 30% of the cost of businesses to invest. Consumers get a federal tax credit of $2,000 for the renewable. States are throwing in a hefty portion of additional incentives, and they're offering a subsidy of residential solar as much as $2.50 per installed watt. And you look at all this and you do the analysis, even at $140 a barrel, the idea that solar panels are going to break even is questionable. So I think with that, and particularly in light of what's happening in China, I think your office would be well to look at all the other stimulus packages dealing with photovoltaic cells. And with that, the
Mr. Chairman,
is adjourned. Yes.
May I just ask a question before adjourned? Our written questions will be permitted, and they will be responded to and included in the record?
They will. They will be, and the witnesses will be responsible for answering these questions under the order of the House.
And further, Mr. Chairman, I'm grateful we have the CEO and CFO of Solyndra coming in. I think it's very important that we have the Secretary of Energy and Chairman Liu.
I think Secretary Chu should be invited. I think he should attend, and because the questions both sides have brought up, I think his credibility on this project should be part of the witness process, and so I think...
And Secretary Liu as well?
Secretary Liu as well, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Subcommittee is adjourned.